Chapter 240, Invisibility Cloak. Production of the Philosopher's Stone had to pause. The process required a waiting period until Saturn appeared for the next phase of transmutation. Duir took several days to rest, and when his spirit had fully recovered, he turned his attention elsewhere. He did not intend to sit idle during the months before Saturn's return. From a sign-in reward back in Dongyi City, he had learned how to craft an invisibility cloak, and now seemed the perfect time to try. In the magical world, ordinary invisibility cloaks are usually just fabrics enchanted with disillusionment or invisibility charms. Finer ones are woven from demiguise hair. But such cloaks fade with time, their invisibility weakening, revealing spells and sensory magic can pierce them. Only the invisibility cloak of the Deathly Hallows is permanent. Legend says it hides not only sight, but also the wearer's magical signature, voice, and even heartbeat, resisting every conventional and unconventional detection. In The Tales of Beetle the Bard, the third Peverell brother is said to have received such a cloak from Death, allowing him to evade finding until he willingly greeted Death at the end of his life. Whether or not the tale ever involved Death, the three Peverells are better understood as master magicians who created three extraordinary artifacts: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. Each is unique, unrivaled power, the ability to call back shades, and an undiminishing cloak that helped Harry Potter escape danger more than once. Dewey's chief motive for making an invisibility cloak was practical, to hide from Sauron's prying. Sauron watched Mordor with the ever-burning eye and possessed a palantir capable of long-range spying. His Master Stone saw far more than Dewey's own palantir ever could. When Dewey drew on Mercury's power the last time, he attracted Sauron's attention. Only Galadriel's presence and her quick deprivation of Sauron's sight kept his secrets safe. Dewey did not yet know that Sauron had already learned about the Philosopher's Stone and was moving to seize it. All he knew was that an invisibility cloak that could evade a palantir would be a valuable safeguard. Middle-earth already had its own concealing garments. The Elves of Lothlorien wove cloaks that made wearers hard to notice, like a combined notice-me-not and disillusionment charm. Dewey already owned such a cloak, woven for him by Arwen. Even more potent was the dark cloak of Ungoliant. In the Years of the Two Trees, Ungoliant wove a mantle of spider silk that hid her and Morgoth from the Valar, allowing them to reach and corrupt Valinor itself. Dewey did not expect to match that level of craft, but he wanted an invisibility cloak whose effect would not fade with time, something permanent, like the Hallows cloak. The craft notes he'd received claimed the third Peverell brother had woven his cloak from demiguise hair, not from some exotic or supernatural fiber. The difference lay in the magic used during weaving. There were, however, no demiguise in Middle-earth. Dewey therefore needed a substitute. He chose giant spider silk without hesitation. After all, Ungoliant herself had woven a cloak of spiderweb. The silk of her descendants, especially from powerful lines like Shelob's, seemed the most promising. In the Amonsul Tower wing of Hogwarts Castle, Dewey kept a colony of giant spiders. They served multiple purposes: a reserve food source for the basilisk Hairpo, and, under Imperio control, a trained corps of weavers. When Dewey entered the spider's chamber, it looked like a tiny, bustling factory. Rows of giant spiders sat at their stations, spinning and weaving with astonishing speed and precision. Bolts of rich, gleaming fabric rolled off their webs. The textiles were everywhere in the castle: bed coverings, carpets, curtains, tapestries, and were extraordinarily tough. Ordinary swords and knives had trouble cutting them, and fire did not easily consume them. If accidents were avoided, a single bolt might last centuries. These spider silk fabrics were also issued as garments, light, strong, and remarkably protective. Dewey's militia, attendants, and household staff all wore them. The cloth could blunt fatal attacks better than heavy armor. Dewey now oversaw 2 towns, Hogsmeade and Bree, each with populations over 10,000. He had organized militias and appointed mayors, Luke in Hogsmeade and the vain, showy Lucky in Bree, who competed to demonstrate their city's success. To receive clothing of the castle's spider silk was an honor. Lucky delighted in flaunting his. Outside the castle, the fabric fetched outrageous prices, but because Hogwarts' spiders could churn out bolts continuously, the castle did not lack stock. Smaug, self-appointed steward of the treasury, did not see the silk as merely useful. Betting that scarcity would raise prices, the dragon turned merchant, coordinating sales through Dewey's butler Edward and hoarding supply with a wink and a ledger. Smaug loved gold. He pictured himself drowning in coins and set about manipulating markets. Dewey could only watch, half amused, half exasperated, as Smaug calculated the inflow of gold. Dewey examined the spiders one by one. The silk they produced was tough, resistant to blade and bearing some magical conductivity. But these were common giant spiders, distant descendants of Ungoliant, whose bloodlines had long since diluted. If he wanted to craft an invisibility cloak that could rival the Hallows cloak, he needed the best material he could find. Ordinary spider silk would not do. There had once been a giant spider queen in Mirkwood with a bloodline close to Ungoliant's. Dewey, Thranduil, and Radagast the Brown had struggled to kill her. Unfortunately, that queen had already ended up in the belly of Harpo the Basilisk. The idea of Ungoliant herself was even more distant. Ungoliant's webs had once nearly strangled Morgoth. Only the Balrog's burning whips freed him. Silk that could bind Morgoth would be the ultimate material, but facing Ungoliant would be suicidal. A more attainable ideal was Shelob. Born in the First Age as one of Ungoliant's offspring, Shelob had fled the destruction of Beleriand and established lairs east of Mordor. Her descendants populated Mirkwood and the neighboring wilds. The Mirkwood Spider Queen had inherited part of Shelob's strength, which is why her silk had been so prized. If Dewey could obtain real Shelob-spun silk, or even silk from a close descendant, it might be perfect. He imagined the possibilities. An invisibility cloak woven from Shelob's line could be superior even to the Hallows cloak. It was an ambitious thought, perhaps too ambitious. But Dewey did not lack imagination, and he had time. For now, he would begin experimenting with the best spider silk he could access, and see how far enchantment and craft could take him toward a cloak that might keep Sauron and any other prying eye at bay. Dewey needed Shelob the Great Spider's silk to make an invisibility cloak. The problem was, Shelob wasn't just any giant spider. She was a descendant of Ungoliant, immensely powerful and not something you bargained with. Worse, her lair sat at Cirith Ungol on the border of Mordor, dangerously close to Minas Morgul, once Minas Ithil. Any trip there risked drawing Sauron's attention. Still, Dewey judged the risk worth it. He didn't intend to kill Shelob, only to collect enough silk, and he could always escape by apparating away with a portkey if anything went wrong. Mentos. Dewey turned a brooch into a one-use portkey and grabbed it. The world lurched. In a blink, he was in Edoras, the royal city of Rohan. A portkey must land where he'd been before, so he could not go straight to Shelob's lair. He didn't stay in Edoras, though. He apparated from visible spot to visible spot, closing ground rapidly until he reached the eastern end of the White Mountains and crossed into Gondor territory. There, the Anduin flowed past the mountain foot toward the sea. To its east rose the Mountains of Shadow, the barrier that marked Mordor's western edge. Shelob's cave was on the western slope of Cirith Ungol, right in the middle of those mountains. The pass itself, guarded by the Tower of Cirith Ungol, was one of the few western approaches into Mordor. Built by the Gondorians after the last alliance to watch Mordor, the tower had long since fallen to Sauron's servants and become an outpost of Minas Morgul. Dewey apparated across the Anduin and arrived on the Mountains of Shadow. He could have gone south along the river to Minas Tirith and signed in there, but that would be unnecessary trouble. His mission was simple: Shelob's silk. Other tasks could wait. As he neared Cirith Ungol, Dewey spotted the tower and the orcs patrolling around it. He paused for a moment, then altered his clothes into tattered rags like an orc's garb. His features shifted too, skin paling, hair thinning, until, looking into a conjured mirror, he recoiled. Ugh, so ugly. The reflection showed an orc, sparse hair, a flattened nose, greenish lips and tusks. Reluctantly accepting it, Dewey disguised his staff as a heavy wooden club and swaggered toward the pass. He had barely reached the watchtower when an eye-patched orc in ragged armor blocked him. "Stop! Where are you from?" "I've never seen you before," the captain demanded in black speech, suspicion in every flick of his eyes. The other orcs glared, hands on weapons. Dewey didn't answer at once. He watched the group and used legilimency to sift through their thoughts and memories. The captain, impatient, stepped forward and barked, "I'm talking to you. Are you deaf, boy?" and thrust his mace. The smell from the orc was foul enough to make Dewey's stomach flip. Without hesitation, he lifted the club and sent the captain flying. The other orcs froze, stunned into silence. "You hit me? Boy, you're dead today! I'll tear you apart!" the captain roared, recovering and charging again. Dewey met him with the club. The captain fought with crude brutality, swinging the mace with all his strength. Dewey's own power and skill, sharpened under the training of his brothers-in-law, Eladon and Elrohir, made most opponents easy, but he deliberately held back, concealing refined technique and fighting with broad, brutal strokes to appear like a typical orc brawler. For a while, the duel went back and forth, and the gathered orcs grew noisily excited, chanting and cheering the captain on. The captain's temper flared when he couldn't finish Dewey. He even drew a dagger and lunged to kill. That was the cue Dewey had waited for. As the captain thrust, Dewey blocked the mace, snagged the dagger with a backhand, and before the stunned orc could react, slit his throat. Black blood spurted. The captain clutched his neck and collapsed, twitching once before going still. Silence fell. Every pair of orc eyes was on Dewey. "I am your captain now," Dewey said coldly, throwing the blood-smeared dagger aside. His eyes, slightly red in the light, scanned the ring of faces. "Anyone who disagrees, step forward and challenge me, but be prepared to die like him." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. The orcs exchanged glances. None stepped up. One by one, they lowered their heads in submission. "Captain!" they cried, voices echoing. Dewey allowed himself a small smile. Among orcs, leadership was won by might. The dead captain had been their strongest. Anyone who defeated him earned his place. Since Dewey had killed him, even though they didn't know his name, they accepted the new order without question. And with his Orcish disguise, no one suspected anything other than a brutish new leader. He had, for the moment, command of 100 orcs at the watchtower, tasked with guarding the pass and harassing Gondor, though Gondor's weakened state made such sorties rare. Idle orcs were dangerous, and they looked to their new captain for direction. "Captain, what do we do with the old captain's body?" one of them asked cautiously. Dewey gave him a cold look. "Send him to Torek Ungol," he said, Shelob's lair. Torek Ungol was a fetid cave at the base of a nearby cliff, Shelob's den. To keep her as an effective guardian, Sauron's forces habitually sent wounded, dying, and dead orcs and captured prisoners to be fed to her. Shelob, lethargic and gluttonous, accepted. In return, she made the pass perilous to any who tried to cross. The alliance was simple and grim. Shelob got food, and the tower got a monstrous guardian. At Dewey's words, the orcs stiffened. "Who will carry him?" someone croaked. Carrying bodies to Shelob was a near-suicide mission. Often the designated bearers themselves ended up as food. No one wanted the job. Dewey watched the flinching orcs and let a playful glint show in his eyes. "We'll do it by lot," he said. "Two who draw the red arrow will take the body. I will take part two. No exceptions." A murmur ran through the crowd. The orcs were surprised that their new captain would even risk the task himself. Dewey had them produce 100 arrows. He dyed 2 arrowheads red and mixed them among the others in a long tube, leaving only the nocks exposed. Then, one by one, the orcs came forward to draw. Each who pulled a regular arrow breathed a visible sigh of relief. When pulled a red-tipped arrow, their face fell into despair, while the others jeered. Tension built as the tube's contents dwindled. At last, only 2 arrows remained in the tube. Only one orc and Dewey had yet to draw. The last orc hesitated, fingers trembling, unable to decide which of the 2 arrows to take. Dewey grew impatient, shoved the orc aside with a boot, and said, "What are you waiting for? I'll go first." He plunged his hand into the tube and drew an arrow. A collective gasp rose from the orcs. Dewey's arrowhead was red. The man he had kicked aside stared in dumbfounded joy, and then confusion, as Dewey held up the red-tipped shaft for all to see. Chapter 242, Giant Spider Shelob. When Dewey pulled out the last red-tipped arrow, the orcs fell instantly silent, each holding his breath and listening for any sign of anger. Orcs respected strength, and they feared that drawing a red arrow might mean a sudden reprisal. But Dewey showed no expression. He simply said, "Fine. Since it's been drawn, the 2 of us will take it to her." Relief swept through them. The others exchanged surprised, relieved looks, astonished that their new captain kept his word. If he came back from the spider's lair alive, he would win their loyalty. Only the other orc who had drawn the red arrow looked bereft, as if half his life had been taken. He had not yet seen Shelob, and already his fate seemed sealed. Amid a chorus of mock farewells and quiet scheming, Duir and the unlucky orc set off with the dead captain's corpse, hauling it 20 miles toward the great spider's lair. Duir walked ahead, unconcerned, like a lord. The other orc staggered behind, burdened with the corpse, panting as though at the edge of collapse. The rest of the cohort lingered and, almost in the same breath, forgot to ask the new captain's name. "Who cares what he's called?" one grunted. "He's going to end up in a spider's belly anyway." They all nodded, convinced the duo would not return. With the old captain dead and the new one presumably doomed, they began to plot among themselves, watching one another with fresh suspicion. Duir descended the steep steps and tunneled paths toward Cirith Ungol at a steady pace, outwardly relaxed but inwardly alert. The orc hauling the corpse could hardly keep pace. Duir offered no help. When the orc suggested leaving the body at the cave mouth and retreating, Duir smiled and seemed to agree. "Really?" the orc breathed, grateful for the reprieve. Duir's smile vanished. "Of course not," he murmured, and with the word came the cold command of Imperio. The orc's eyes glazed. He moved as if sleepwalking, obedient. "Take the body to the cave entrance," Duir ordered. The controlled orc obeyed without hesitation, dragging the larger dead captain to the maw of the cave and standing there vacant and still. Duir melted himself into the shadows and waited. The mountains of shadow were true to their name. A permanent veil of clouds and mist clung to their peaks. Trees were sparse, rocks bared, the land desolate. At the foot of a massive rock face on the west side of Cirith Ungol, jagged stones formed a natural maze around a cavernous opening. The cave was a black hole that seemed to swallow light and sound. A fetid stench hung in the air, thick and choking, and silence pressed on the ears like a hand. From that dark mouth came movement. A spider as large as a hut crawled out, swollen and grotesque. A short neck behind a bloated body, segmented legs ending in cruel claws, a head crowned with horn-like protrusions, and a crawl of many eyes grouped into two shining clusters. Pure black and glistening with an unwholesome sheen, the creature radiated an aura of darkness that made the air feel thin. Just to look upon it was to feel color leach from the world, memories dulled, senses numbed, and fear rooted into the soul. This was Shelob, last spawn of Ungoliant, queen of the Darkweavers, one of the most fearsome spiders in Middle-earth. Shelob was selfish and monstrous, allied to no one, only ever cooperating with Sauron when it suited her hunger. Orcs, men, elves, any living thing, were food. Wounded and dying orcs were useful to Sauron. They were handed over to Shelob to satisfy her appetite. In return, she would bar the pass to anyone who tried to cross. It was a simple, merciless economy. The orcs provided meat, and she maintained the chokehold on the pass. The smell of fresh meat stirred her. Shelob spat silk and wrapped the captain's corpse into a tight bundle with the two front limbs. Her many eyes twitched toward the motionless orc by the cave mouth, still under Imperio, and she darted forward, stinging him into unconsciousness and cocooning him with narrow, glistening webbing. Then, rather than drag her prey back into the cave as she usually would, she fixed her attention on a shadowed figure farther off. Duir no longer hid. He dismissed his disillusionment charm and stepped into the open. Shelob's eyes shone with the patient hunger of a predator. She sniffed the air, perplexed by something unfamiliar. A dry, rasping voice, like nails on glass, rasped out of her. "You are not an orc. What are you?" Duir had heard the Spider Queen speak before while clearing webbed creatures in Mirkwood, so he was not surprised by the sound. Still, the oppressive dark power emanating from Shelob warned him against laxity. Her presence was like an invisible shroud that dulled the senses and weighed on the mind. He closed himself off with occlumency, his mental fortress sealing him from that crushing darkness, and at the same time called his wooden staff back into its true form. He raised it and shouted, "Avada Kedavra!" A green flash lanced toward Shelob's bulk. The spider responded instantly, spitting a sheet of thick black web to shield herself. The killing curse struck the web and exploded in a violent, hissing discharge. Duir's face went hard when he saw the web hold. It took the full force of the curse like an elastic net. A hole was blasted through, but the web did not give way. Silk of that strength would be perfect, even ideal, for an invisibility cloak. The thought tightened Dewey's jaw. Shelob's reaction was fury. "Not an orc," she rasped. "A wizard. I will eat you." She lashed out. One great clawed leg smashed down like a black column toward him. "Confringo." Dewey fired at the descending limb. The spell detonated against the segmented shell, but Shelob's armor was like iron. The magic only slowed the blow. He threw up a shield charm, but the leg struck with such force that the shield barely held and then shattered under the next impact. He threw spell after spell, fire, explosions, but none could pierce that tough exoskeleton. Her defenses were almost absolute. Worse, Shelob's eyes reached for his mind. Their glare dragged him into a vivid mental illusion. Without his occlumency, he might have been swallowed completely. A smothering, absolute darkness. The sense of being surrounded by thousands of Shelobs attacking from every direction. Impossible to tell which threat was real. The mental landscape tried to disorient and drown him. Only the mental castle within his mind held firm enough to keep him from falling entirely into the dream. Outside that mental ruse, Shelob watched with triumph as the wizard stumbled, his directionless resistance mocking him. She prepared the final trap. A thick, long strand of black silk shot forth from her maw, meant to bind him as she had bounded so many others, to drag him back into her den. But the web never reached him. About a meter from Dewey, the black silk thudded against an invisible barrier and frayed. Shelob's many eyes narrowed, puzzled, and then immediately alert. The source of the resistance was obvious to her in a flash. The ring of power on Dewey's left hand, worn on his finger, flashed faintly as if sensing the assault, and the web could not pass. Chapter 243, Spider Silk Clothes. Shelob tested the barrier with brute force, looking for any weakness. The great spider did not believe in mystical protections. She believed only in strength. But the barrier held 360 degrees of flawless, uninterrupted defense. Frustrated, she turned to the only thing she trusted, her silk. Spitting jet-black threads, she wrapped them around the shimmering shield, using her forelegs to hold Dewey, still enclosed within the barrier, as she wound layer upon layer. In minutes, the two of them were sealed in a vast black cocoon, the magic barrier propping up Dewey's form inside like an inner skeleton. "Humph," Shelob hissed triumphantly. "Even a turtle shell won't save you. Wrapped in my webs, you won't get away." She knew the magic that sustained the barrier would not last forever. When the caster's power waned and the ward failed, it would be time for her feast. Confident the captive could not escape, she dragged the cocoon and the two orc corpses deep into her dark cavern. The lair was a labyrinth of tunnels, a maze lined with endless black webs that devoured light. Even Eärendil's star silver couldn't penetrate that gloom. Darkness here was absolute, so complete that sight and even the other senses blurred into confusion. Bones littered the halls in monstrous heaps. Beasts, orcs, men, even elves. Piles of white and dust rose like cairns, more corpses than the paths of the dead. Since fleeing to these shadows after the War of Wrath, Shelob had fed for ages. The toll of her hunger had become immeasurable. Shelob was descended from Ungoliant, the void-born devourer. Like her ancestor, she ate by dissolving flesh, injecting venom to liquefy internal organs and muscles and then sucking the nutrients through her mouthparts. She began with the orc corpses. Her tail stinger plunged into them, the venom working fast. Muscle, organ, and then bone turned to a black broth. The grieving life left the one living orc as the poison overrode Dewey's Imperio. He came back to himself, only to feel his body melt from within and then die. Satisfied with that meal, Shelob turned her attention to the cocoon around Dewey. She lifted her tail and thrust the stinger against the outer web. Venom seeped and sizzled, corroding the magic barrier itself, thinning it, making ripples as it ate the ward away. Shelob crouched, already savoring the moment she believed would follow, the barrier broken, Dewey trapped and helpless inside. Then, without warning, she stiffened. A shriek, high and piercing, split the cavern as she sprang back. Her stinger, sharp and terrible, was gone, cleanly severed. From between the black threads of the cocoon, a sudden, blinding light poured out, scattering the inky gloom. The silk split from within, as if cleaved by a blade of fire. Dewey stepped out, flaming sword in one hand, the phial of starlight in the other, spilling the pure light of Eärendil into the cave. The starlight drove Shelob back, forcing her to retreat into shadow and hiss. And at that moment, a system prompt flickered into being, clear, unnatural, and out of place in that ancient darkness. Hogwarts Sign-in System, locating Mountains of Shadow, Torek Ungol Cave. Sign in? Dewey blinked. He had not expected a sign-in to be possible down here, but he would not pass up a benefit. He muttered the command in his mind. Sign in. Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining Madame Malkin's magical textile craft. Madame Malkin's? Dewey's first reaction was bemusement. The name belonged to the seamstress of Diagon Alley, maker of Hogwarts robes. A magical textile craft sounded quaint compared with a flaming sword and a phial of starlight. He filed the reward away mentally, useful perhaps later, and returned his attention to the cave. Shelob did not intend to let the intruder go. She spat a black miasma that unfurled like a net, blotting out the starlight and clawing for him. At the same instant, far away, the eye of Sauron atop Barad-dûr swiveled and fixed its gaze in the direction of Cirith Ungol. Dewey felt the sensation. Something primal in him had shifted. His soul seemed stretched and sharpened by what he'd endured. His senses had become keener, and he felt the Palantir's stare as a pressure across the world. He did not hesitate. Smiling despite himself, he addressed Shelob in a light voice. Thank you for the spider silk. Goodbye. He placed his hand on the remains of the black cocoon, activated the port key, and vanished. Shelob's scream followed him, echoing through the caverns, through the pass, and finally reaching the orcs posted at Minas Morgul. They trembled and whispered, voices small against the spider's rage. It's her voice. Who made her angry? One asked. Captain and his team? Another guessed. Only Dewey and his party had gone into Shelob's lair. Whether they are alive or not. A third said with glee, the Spider Queen won't leave them be. Quick as vultures, the orcs began to think of election and leadership, already assuming Dewey would not return. When Dewey reappeared on Weathertop, he let out a long, grateful breath. The mission had gone as well as it could, until the very end when Sauron had taken notice. But he had left in time. Sauron had been denied capture. He knew that from now on, Sauron would be vigilant. Anywhere within the Palantir's sight became unsafe. Fortunately, Weathertop lay beyond that reach, and he could relax. He glanced down at the black bundle he'd brought, Shelob's silk, still faintly warm. The spider had wound an immense quantity around him. It would be enough to make not one, but many invisibility cloaks. Shelob's silk was astonishingly strong, even elven blades strained against it. Its true vulnerability was fire, more precisely, the fire of a Balrog. Ordinary flame did little, but Balrog fire could break it down. That, Dewey realized, explained how he'd cut himself out. His flaming sword contained a flame crystal seeded with Balrog power and had absorbed fiend fire. Its edge could act like living flame and wind, shearing the silk clean. More than toughness, Shelob's threads had a magical property. They swallowed light. Nothing, no starlight, no lamplight, penetrated them. That made them ideal for the greatest of cloaks, an invisibility cloak of the Peverell kind. Ordinary invisibility was a taut enchantment over a garment. The Peverell cloak, however, was woven rune by rune, single threads carrying small loops of magic woven into a whole, preserving its power for 1,000 years. To reproduce such a cloak, one needed exquisite weaving to set each little rune perfectly into the fabric. Dewey was not a weaver. He had no patience for threads and patterns. Even with time, he could not hope to become a master. What the sign-in had given him, Madame Malkin's magical textile craft, was only knowledge, not instant ability. He didn't intend to learn the craft himself. Instead, he thought of Arwen. Arwen was a treasure beyond measure, a gifted fighter, a talented mage, and astonishingly versatile. Music, tongues, painting, forging, cooking, and yes, weaving and embroidery. She had made many of his garments, including the robe he wore now. The giant spiders in the castle tower, Hogwarts' own weavers, had been trained by her hand. Every tapestry and curtain in the old castle bore her mark. Arwen would not refuse him. To make the most of the sign-in reward, Dewey extracted the memory of Madame Malkin's craft and placed it in the crown of wisdom, then set the crown upon Arwen's head. The knowledge flowed into her like rain on a fertile field. She already had the fine motor skill and the eye for detail. With the crown's blessing, the craft took hold quickly, and she mastered the magical textile techniques almost at once. They set to work. First, they separated the spider silk skein into manageable threads and soaked them in a special solution that removed the sticky residue without robbing their tensile strength. Dewey refined a batch of mithril and drew it out into threads finer than hair to be woven into the fabric. Mithril provided durability and a subtle weave-conductive property for the runes. With the processed silk and the mithril filaments ready, the pair began the slow and meticulous process of weaving. They worked like artisans of legend, Arwen's hands moving with practiced grace, her fingers setting stitches that would become runes of concealment. Dewey at her side, preparing materials, holding light and edge when needed. Together they wove and wove, forming strand upon strand into patterns that would carry magic for centuries. The cloak they were building was no mere garment. It was the meeting place of ancient skill and a curious, uncanny resource, Shelob's own webbing, woven into an answer to a power older than either of them. Chapter 244, The Philosopher's Stone in Progress. Weaving the invisibility cloak was a monumental task. The cloak had to be hand-woven inch by inch. Magical shortcuts were out of the question. Spells disturbed the cloak's fragile magical balance, and the precision required was beyond what enchanted looms could manage. It reminded Dewey of his previous life. Machines could produce ordinary cloth, but exquisite brocades, Shu and Yun brocade, still demanded patient, exacting handwork. A single misthread could ruin an entire piece. The invisibility cloak, however, was far more demanding. Tens of thousands of tadpole-sized runic symbols had to be woven perfectly, each made from single strands of spider silk and mithril thread. An ordinary artisan might take a day to weave one of those tiny symbols. At that rate, a cloak would demand over 10,000 days, nearly 3 years. That was how long Peverell had needed to make an invisibility cloak. Arwen was nothing like an ordinary weaver. Not only were her skills exquisite, her hands moved with astonishing speed. She could weave a perfect runic symbol in less than half a day, immediately cutting the timetable in half. In time, her pace improved again, 3 symbols a day, so a task that would have taken 3 years now looked likely to finish in roughly 1. To neutralize the darker properties of the spider silk and to strengthen the cloak's magic, Arwen wove strands of her own long hair into it. Dewey winced for her beautiful hair and promptly brewed a hair growth potion so it would grow back quickly. He left the actual weaving almost entirely to Arwen. His role was design and support. 3 months slipped by in a blur as she worked, her threads constantly dancing between her fingers. While Arwen labored at the loom, Dewey prepared for the 3rd stage of the Philosopher's Stone's refinement. He conserved his strength as the predicted rising of Lumbar, Saturn, approached. For this crucial phase, he chose not to return to Orthanc at Isengard, but to remain at the Hogwarts stronghold on Weathertop, where he had already constructed a megalithic array when he forged Hufflepuff's Golden Cup. That array could draw upon Saturn's power and was the most suitable place for the transformation that awaited him. When Lumbar rose above the eastern horizon, Dewey stood already within the megalithic circle. On the stone platform at its center, the mithril furnace glowed anew with dragon blood flames, blood red and hungry. Inside the double-necked flask sat a shimmering silver-white powder that gave off a faint jasmine scent, the white stone. To fuel the flames, he had returned to Isengard and, with great effort, obtained over a dozen barrels of dragon blood from Smaug, whose wounds had only just begun to mend. At Saturn's zenith, Dewey activated the array. He removed the Arkenstone he had prepared and, without hesitation, cast it into the furnace. Earth element power flowed from the gem under the dragon fire, and the array drew Saturn's light down from the sky, condensing it into a column of starlight that plunged into the circle. The spectacle did not go unnoticed across Middle-earth. People whispered and wondered how Dewey could call down starlight for months on end. Even the great eye above Barad Duir turned westward, greed and possessiveness kindled in its gaze. A faint voice echoed from Mordor, murmuring, "Not yet, it's not time." But Dewey paid it no mind. His focus was entirely on the furnace. The array filled with Saturn's power like drifting stardust, dazzling and bright. Dewey fed his own magic into the furnace, guiding Saturn's influence and the earth element streaming from the Arkenstone into the flask to mix with the white stone. The dragon blood's catalytic heat forced reaction and fusion. Slowly, The white powder began to shift, taking on a golden-yellow hue. The shimmering silver light turned to gold. Arwen did not continue weaving that night. She stood guard outside the circle, worry etched on her face. The albedo stage had tested Dewey's mind, making him confront the greed within his heart. Who knew what trial this stage would bring? Inside the array, Dewey did face a trial. A single drop of the substance in the flask liquefied into a tiny, blazing bead of molten gold. It gave off a light as warm and gentle as the sun, and an aroma like clothes dried in sunlight. The golden glow seeped through the mithril furnace, tinting the silver with sacred light. Bathing in that light, Dewey felt warmth flood him, his body shifting, his life potential expanding. He felt as if he were becoming more than mortal, his flesh moving toward a higher order. But the boon came with a cruel side effect. His senses sharpened to the point of torment. Sight grew painfully saturated. Every color struck his eyes like a glare. Hearing amplified to an unbearable degree. His breath, the rush of blood through his veins, the pounding of his heart, the hum of the magic array. Every tiny noise assaulted him. Smells that had been pleasant turned sharp and intrusive. Touch was no comfort. The friction of his robes against his skin, even a whisper of air, prickled and irritated. The acute senses fractured his concentration and made sustaining his magic almost impossible. The intensity only increased as the substance continued changing. With no alternative, Dewey shut his eyes tight, cast a muffling charm to dull the cacophony, pinched his nostrils closed to lessen scent, and sank into meditative focus. He poured his will into the furnace and into the array, centering every thread of attention on the transformation taking place inside the flask. Night gave way to day, and the days stretched on. Lumbar slid into the western sky, but the megalithic array held. Starlight pooled within it and spilled a reflected glow over the castle. The tall melon tree and the white tree shone as if lit from within. The light from Weathertop reached as far as Bree and Hogsmeade. Merchants stopped in their stalls, travelers looked up in awe, bards hunted for words to honor the miracle, painters hurried to their easels. The sight made people tremble with reverence. As the days passed, Saturn's direct light thinned, and the dragon blood in the furnace kept burning. Dewey continued to channel the planet's power and the Arkenstone's earth element into the flask, where the dragon blood's heat forced the white powder ever closer to completion. The silver-white substance dwindled, the golden liquid grew and glowed brighter. The array constrained most of that brilliance, but a few slivers still bled out into the sky and across the castle. The effect was not merely visual. Those who lived and worked inside Weathertop found, subtly at first and later unmistakably, that their vitality had changed. Bathed in that contained golden radiance, the bodies of people, animals, and plants within the circle seemed to gain intangible benefits, a resilience against disease, a robustness that promised longer, healthier lives. Arwen and Smaug were aware of the change. The castle's servants only noticed much later, when illness and misfortune no longer troubled them as they once had. Word spread, and Weathertop came to be regarded as a blessed place, a realm of longevity that folk dreamed of entering to receive its favor. On the 49th day, the white substance was almost entirely transformed. The golden liquid now shone with a brilliance rivaling the light of Arendelle, a tiny sun at the heart of the furnace, so intense that, though the array held most of it in, a golden wash still leaked beyond the stones and bathed the whole castle. Dewey, though tormented by sharpened senses, endured. He felt his life force lengthen, sensed the slow accretion of something new in his bones. The pain of the trial remained, but so did the promise of what this work would bring. Chapter 245, Physical Transformation. When the white substance in the flask finally turned into a golden liquid, its brilliance withdrew as if embarrassed, no longer blinding, no longer roaring with light. Dewey exhaled at last, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Without that fierce glow wrapped around him, the extreme sharpening of his senses began to ease. The agony in his nerves that had driven him to contemplate giving up, more than once, receded. He had borne it, and the result was worth the strain. His 5 senses had been amplified beyond what he had expected, more than doubled. His sight could pick out the tiny cluster of houses in Hogsmeade below the mountain, the travelers along the Great East Road 10 miles away, even the cut of their cloaks, all in crisp clarity. He could hear the faintest sounds, a bard by the Black Lake reciting verses that praised Hogwarts with earnest passion. Pretty prose, mediocre technique. Dewey sneered mildly to himself. His sense of smell was sharpened to a degree he'd only ever half-joked about. He could pick out the scent of grass, of particular flowers, even the holy white tree and the melon tree. Closing his eyes, he could tell which fragrances rode on which breeze and follow their trails. So he thought, I've got a dog's nose now. His sense of touch was different, too. Not merely more sensitive, but more anticipatory. It was like a spider's warning. Tiny changes in wind, the pressure of approaching footsteps, the almost imperceptible shift in the air before someone came up behind him. It gave him time to dodge, to react ahead of an attack. Crucially, the earlier overwhelming discomfort was gone. Now he could turn his heightened senses on or off at will. Taken together, his physical faculties now rivaled an elf's, not only in strength but in finesse. Even more astonishing was the awakening of his life potential. The transformation had extended his natural lifespan. Even without any additional enchantment, this new body should let him live easily 300 or 400 years, far longer than ordinary men, even the long-lived Dunedain. He let a smile break through. He quenched the dragon blood flame in the furnace, opened it, and took out the flask. The Arkenstone he had thrown into the fire with it had survived, miraculously intact. Though much of its earthy power had been drawn off, the gem's white radiance was dulled, no longer brilliant. The golden liquid in the bottle spun lazily of its own accord, forming a miniature storm that gave off a soft, steady light, no longer blinding, but full of concentrated power. This was the Philosopher's Stone at its third stage, the sun wheel, the yellowing. At this point, the elixir in the flask could not transmute base metals into gold, but it possessed the power to lengthen life. Taken directly, it might grant centuries more, 600, 700 years, perhaps even 1,000. Of course, an alchemist who could complete this stage would be far more likely to finish the stone entirely than to drink away its value for a few centuries. How long the yellow elixir might extend a life remained speculative. Few would ever risk sacrificing the stone's final potential. Only the final reddening stage remained. Once that completed, the Red Philosopher's Stone, the legendary treasure capable of transmutation and immortality, would be born. Congratulations, Duir. Your Philosopher's Stone is one step from completion, Arwen said from outside the stone circle, her voice warm and sincere. Dewey stepped out and took her hand. He brushed a thumb gently across her cheek and smiled. He set the flask into her palm and said, solemn and steady under her surprised gaze, when the stone is finished, I will present it as a betrothal gift and ask Lord Elrond for your hand. Arwen's eyes widened. Tears shimmered in their starlit depths as that brilliant smile, quiet, fierce, spread across her face. Good, she whispered. I'll be waiting. For the final stage of the stone, he would need to fuse fire and air elements at the celestial alignment of Venus conjunct Mars. The two planets appearing together in the night sky happened roughly once a year and could last from a few days to many weeks. Elrond predicted that this year's conjunction would begin in a month and, unusually, run for 2.5 months, more than enough time to work. To bind fire and air, Dewey needed both the Ring of Fire and the Ring of Air. Elrond would be easy to reach. He was in Rivendell much of the time. But Gandalf was a wanderer, unpredictable and hard to pin down. Dewey could send a Patronus as a message, but the charm wasn't omnipotent. Over great distances, its form would deteriorate, and it might fail to carry anything at all. So he went to the Owl Tower. The Owl Tower stood at the northwest corner of Hogwarts, a separate spire of the castle with the owlery above and stables below. The owls there were great snow owls Dewey had imported from Annúminas in the far northwest, creatures of Númenor. Those owls associated with Thorondor, the great eagle of the melon tree, and were far cleverer than ordinary owls. Dewey had bred and trained them as his personal messengers and had developed a special owl potion to sharpen their abilities. Owls in the magical world were not the same as wild, mundane owls. Wizardry and potions trained them. In Diagon Alley, owl vendors fed different brews to their birds to improve their targeting and comprehension. A perfect owl potion could make a snow owl understand speech, find a person without a detailed address, and even navigate the constant shifts of an itinerant wizard. Professor Snape once had made his living improving and selling such potions. Dewey had replicated and refined the recipe, fed the potion to his great snow owls, and entrusted one with his letter to Gandalf. After a strip of meat and a few murmured instructions, the great snow owl took to the air. A week later, it returned bearing Gandalf's reply. Gandalf was in Minas Tirith and promised to be back a week before the Venus-Mars conjunction. Relief washed over Dewey. With Gandalf available, the final stage could begin. There was still time, and Dewey turned his mind to another project, the invisibility cloak. Arwen had already woven half of it. Its main material was the silk of Shelob the Great, reinforced with mithril thread and strands of Arwen's hair. From a distance, the cloak appeared in absolute black, but silver threads traced tadpole-shaped runes across its surface, catching the light like stars. Up close, those runes were intricate, arcane sigils designed to harmonize into a single, powerful enchantment. Dewey had offered the design. Arwen had done the work. The cloak's magic required tens of thousands of runes, each unique but linked to produce the whole effect. Woven by most people, it would have taken 3 years of patience. Dewey did not possess. Arwen surprised him. Her fingers moved with astonishing speed and precision. The quality of her weave was flawless, the runes vibrant and perfectly synchronized. She worked 2 or 3 times faster than he had expected and seemed to accelerate as she went. At her present pace, the cloak would be finished in less than half a year, just in time, perhaps, for the stone's completion. 2 rewards at once. A month passed. A week before the Venus-Mars conjunction, Dewey took the furnace to Isengard and set up in Orthanc. The final forging would unleash the greatest energies. Only Orthanc's architecture and the tower's amplifying properties could channel them safely and effectively. He moved the furnace to the summit and began to etch arrays and runes in mithril across the tower's parapet with painstaking care. Gandalf arrived from the south, riding Shadowfax, Lord of Horses. He dismounted with a grin and a sweep of his gray cloak. "Long time no see, Duir. I'm not late, am I?" he chuckled. Chapter 246, Venus Conjunct Mars. "Gandalf!" Dewey stepped forward with a grin and embraced him. "Long time no see. How are you?" "Very well." Gandalf chuckled. "I've been in Gondor lately, even spoke with Steward Denethor II about the eastern borders a few days ago. By the way, your owl messenger is remarkable. I was riding Shadowfax at full speed when the letter found me. It startled me more than I expected." Dewey smiled. "They have a knack for finding people. I worried it might miss you, but I relaxed the moment it brought your reply back." A clear eagle cry cut through the air. "Is that?" Gandalf's eyes brightened. Dewey nodded. "That's Aslan. He must have noticed your arrival." From the distance, a griffin the size of a young warhorse swept in and settled before them. Aslan carried both the majesty of a lion and the keen nobility of a great eagle. Gandalf's face lit up. "My word, Aslan has grown even more magnificent, a handsome fellow." If Pegassi pleased the elves, griffins suited Gandalf's taste perfectly. Had he not been bound to Shadowfax, he might have asked for a griffin of his own long ago. Aslan was friendly, permitting Gandalf's approach and even the touch of his hand. That display, however, set Shadowfax's pride aflame. The Horse King snorted and gave a warning whinny, readying his hooves as if to kick the rival mounting his master's attention. Aslan, clever and bold, rubbed himself against Gandalf right in front of Shadowfax. The horse reddened with indignation. Gandalf hurriedly soothed him, promising that he was still his favorite. But Shadowfax sulked and turned his head away, not fooled for a moment. Dewey stood aside, suppressing a laugh. He even caught Shadowfax's indignant thoughts. An onlooker might have suspected infidelity. Eventually, Dewey led Gandalf into the tower. Outside, Shadowfax and Aslan continued their silent, furious staring contest. Since neither would risk a true fight, Dewey and Gandalf left them to it. Inside the gate, they first encountered the 3-headed wolf guarding the entrance. Gandalf had met him before, but seeing him now, he could only whistle in surprise. "My word, he's enormous. At this rate, he won't even fit inside." The 3-headed wolf, Cerberus, remembered Gandalf and greeted the old wizard warmly. He wagged his massive tail, pressed all 3 heads forward to inspect Gandalf with 6 curious eyes, and leaned in to sniff. Gandalf, unafraid of a creature that could have swallowed him whole, reached up and scratched each chin. The wolf closed his eyes and purred in contentment. Dewey shook his head. I don't know how large he will get, but his growth has slowed recently. He should be approaching his limit. Cerberus now towered over 10 meters tall and was one of Dewey's most formidable companions. He breathed fire. His teeth and saliva were toxic. His gaze could stun. His hide had the toughness of copper and iron, shrugging off ordinary blades. His magic resistance was exceptional, and wounds healed quickly. Dewey had fused in the bloodlines of a dragon, a basilisk, and the being known as the Watcher in the Water, a monstrous combination that left Cerberus second only to Smog. The dragons on Dewey's farm were no match for him. Dewey had once tried to use him as a herding dog. The dragons fled from his onslaught of barks and flames, only escaping by taking to the sky. Now Cerberus guarded Orthanc, and with Aslan patrolling overhead, kept Isengard secure whenever Dewey was away. After the introductions, Dewey led Gandalf up into the tower and offered him a golden cup as hospitality. When Dewey poured a bottle of Dorwinian wine, a gift from an elf lord, into the cup, more food and drink appeared, fresh and inviting. Gandalf watched, astonished. The cup did more than heal and nourish. It could make existing food multiply and could summon prepared fare from elsewhere in Middle-earth. The catch was ominous. When the cup drew a meal from another place, that food would inexplicably vanish there. It did not create sustenance from nothing, but it could amplify what already existed, enough to feed a village, a city, even a nation with the right magical support. Gandalf pondered the implications. In the wrong hands, such an artifact would be a divine engine for power. A ruler could display it to win support, desperate peoples would cluster around it, wars could be waged to possess it. And yet here it was, used simply to entertain a guest. The sight only increased Gandalf's admiration for Dewey. Had Dewey wanted dominion like Saruman, he could have made the cup the fulcrum of a campaign. Instead, the cup's existence remained known to only a tight circle, used for friends and for Dewey's private comfort. Dewey, for his part, had no taste for ruling. Hogsmeade and Bree had come under his protection by accident. Isengard had been entrusted to him by Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, and others for management. He left most day-to-day affairs to the appointed mayors and the Dunlendings, intervening only to check on corruption or oppression. His singular ambition, he always said plainly, was simply to grow stronger, to master power for its own sake. That motive was hard for many in Middle-earth to understand. To most, increasing strength was a means to rule. Power kept for its own sake seemed vanity. Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel all regarded Dewey as young and striving, even if Elrond sometimes thought him overly conservative in other ways. Gandalf settled into Orthanc easily. When not watching Dewey trace magic circles and offering the occasional word of advice, he spent time downstairs petting Cerberus's 3 heads, took flights on Aslan, spoke with the hippogriffs in the forest, and visited the dragon pens with unrestrained delight. He stayed longer than he meant to, forgetting to return home. The day of the Venus-Mars conjunction arrived. As the green fire in the hearth burned, Elrond stepped into Orthanc, having come from Rivendell. "Mithrandir, it has been too long. I did not expect you to get here before me," he said with a warm smile. Gandalf laughed. "Lord Elrond, you have much to occupy you. I had little pressing to do and came a week early. I almost forgot the time, engrossed with Duir here." Elrond's gaze turned to Dewey. "Is everything in order, Duir?" Dewey bowed his head slightly. "Everything is ready, Lord Elrond. We are only waiting for the Star of Eärendil and the Star of Carnal to appear together tonight." Elrond nodded. "Good. This convergence, the Star of Eärendil with the Star of Carnal, will be longer and stronger than usual, enduring for months. The starlight will be abundant. It raises the chances of success when refining the Philosopher's Stone. But at that decisive moment, you must remain calm and composed. Do not force it. Do you understand?" "I will," Dewey said, listening to every word. Of all those concerned with the Philosopher's Stone, none felt it more keenly than Elrond. He remembered the story of Luthien and Beren, and feared Arwen repeating the same bitter choice. His counsel and involvement in Dewey's work were born of his desire to see Dewey attain immortality, so that he might stand at Arwen's side for a full life, rather than force her into the sorrowful sacrifice of the past. The care in his voice was plain to hear. Chapter 247, Eärendil's Gift. As the sun slipped beneath the western ocean, two brilliant stars rose together from the place where it had vanished, one white and quivering, the other burning with a red blaze. They were the star of Arundel, Venus, and the star of Carnal, Mars. At the summit platform of Orthanc, Duir stood at the center before a mithril furnace, a magic circle of mithril inscribed at his feet and crowded with strange runes. Elrond, Gandalf, and Arwen waited silently outside the formation. Duir began to feed power into the circle. The runes glowed silver, and Orthanc itself seemed to wake, vibrating and emitting a faint, otherworldly hum. Elrond and Gandalf raised their hands. The rings of air and fire on their fingers flared, and currents of air and fire streamed into the circle. With the ring's aid, the circle drew an even greater force. Elemental winds and flames gathered from miles around and surged toward the sigils like a tidal sea. From the heavens, the two stars answered. Two pillars of starlight, one white, one red, descended and struck the magic circle, pouring their brilliance into the formation. The dual columns were visible for miles. From the Lonely Mountain to Gondor, from Eriador to the borders of Mordor, people saw them. None were wholly surprised. This year had been full of strange, uncanny signs, and many had already guessed that Duir was at the heart of them. High in the firmament, where the starlight originated, a ship sailed across the starry sea. Its hull was white, its oars rhymed in gold, its sails shimmered like woven silver, and the prow curved like a swan's neck. Upon the deck stood a tall half-elf, a white bird perched on his shoulder. He wore a crown set with a single, blindingly brilliant silmaril. The jewel's light bathed him and the ship until it was impossible to tell where the silmaril's glow ended and the figure began. Only a luminous outline remained. He followed the beams that plumbed down to Middle-earth with his gaze. In an instant, he understood what was happening below. Stroking the white bird on his shoulder, he said softly, "Arwen, my granddaughter is loved. Her beloved is an interesting young man." The bird answered in a clear, musical trill. He listened, smiled, and then decided, "Then I will help them." The silmaril flared. The half-elf's whole body erupted into dazzling radiance. The light from the gem intensified, and the ship shone bright against the stars. On the tower, Duir kept the formation steady and drew on the starlight. He, Elrond, Gandalf, and Arwen looked up as the star of Arundel became incomparably bright, like a second moon, and a thicker, purer beam of light descended. It was not merely starlight. It was a concentrated, sacred essence poured down from the jewel itself. Duir's eyes widened. No circle of his making ought to be able to draw such pristine power. Elrond and Gandalf, who had seen more of the West than most, exchanged a look. Gandalf's face softened as he spoke to calm him. "Do not be afraid. That gift comes from Arundel himself, something few have ever received." Elrond added, "The Star of Arundel is, in truth, a silmaril. What you feel now is not ordinary light, but the power held within it. It will aid you to refine a far superior Philosopher's Stone. Do not squander it." Understanding dawned on Duir. He remembered the old tales. Beren and Luthien, who stole a silmaril from Morgoth's crown, Luthien's choice to become mortal, and the passing of the jewel through Duir to Elwing. Elwing's leap into the sea with the silmaril when the sons of Feanor attacked. How Weenan spared her, and she became the great white bird that carried the jewel to Eärendil. Guided by its light, Eärendil sailed to Valinor, pleading with the Valar, and in mercy, the Valar hallowed his ship and set it outside the Gate of Night. With the silmaril upon his brow, he became the great star of hope, sailing the firmament as a watcher for those below. If Eärendil, Elrond's ancestor and Arwen's forebear, had chosen to lend his blessing, Duir did not object to accepting it. He directed the essence of the two stars, the power of Eärendil's silmaril and Carnal's fire, into the furnace. Under the dragon blood flame, the celestial power blended with the golden alchemical solution in the double-necked flask. Elrond and Gandalf continued to feed the circle with the elements of wind and fire through their rings. Under those combined forces, the work proceeded. By morning, when the sun climbed, the stars withdrew to their courses, but the magic circle on Orthanc did not cease. The power accumulated overnight hung in the sigils like stardust. The tower's summit glittered as though a star had been set into its crown. Dunlendings, who lived around Isengard, had watched the two pillars descend and now stared, open-mouthed, as light continued to blaze above the tower. Many of them fell to reverence. Some whispered that Duir was a god made manifest. Inside the furnace, the fire burned with unprecedented intensity. The dragon blood catalyzed the reaction so fiercely that the glass of the double-necked flask vaporized, leaving a single spherical drop of gold suspended in the furnace, untouched by the flame. It drank in air and fire, absorbed the power of the two stars, and slowly changed. A tiny speck of red, no larger than a grain of cinnabar, appeared in the golden globe. It glowed with its own vivid crimson light that pierced the forge and touched Duir like a finger of dawn. The red gleam passed through him. Suddenly his mind cleared as if a crown of insight had settled on his brow. Thoughts moved faster, connections lit up, spells and formulae he had learned uncoiled and rearranged into deeper, truer patterns. Knowledge he had plumbed suddenly made new sense. Alchemy, potions, and the old arcane lore all fell into a clarity he had never known. Power rose within him in a rush. It felt like enlightenment. But that sweetness did not remain unalloyed. As the crimson speck brightened, illusions grew around him, visions shaped from the deepest parts of his desire. They came not as foreign intruders, but as amplified reflections of himself, coaxing and clamoring. Duir fought back with acclumency, building a mental citadel to hold his mind steady. That fortress could repel outside influence, but it could not entirely bar passions born within. The very things he had always wanted were now louder, more insistent. He held them in check for the moment, but he remembered what had happened before. As more of the golden matter turned red, the temptations would swell without limit. Fear pricked at him. If he failed, the Philosopher's Stone would be lost. Worse, he himself could be consumed, no longer a servant to an external ring's will, but shackled to his own magnified appetite. The thought chilled him. Elrond, Gandalf, and Arwen saw his struggle through the circle, and their faces grew grave. Elrond's brow furrowed. "This will be a longer trial than before, and the temptations will be harder," he said quietly. "If Duir can withstand them, his spirit will be perfected, and the stone he produces will be without flaw." But the words carried no certainty. Even Elrond, in all his knowledge and endurance, could not claim he would be immune to every desire from his own heart. He had little faith that a mere youth, however promising, would do better. He had prepared, in case of failure, to rouse Duir and break the process before the young man's will was shattered. The stone then would not be perfect. It would be like the stones of old, powerful, perhaps even to grant long life, as stories of Nicholas Flamel suggested, but unable in the end to prevent the slow decay of the body. Chapter 248. Put it back on? Night fell, and the hidden star of Arundel and the star of Carnal rose again from the western sunset. Starlight poured down onto the summit of Orthanc, streaming into the magic array. At dawn, the stars withdrew, and the array kept working on the residual light. Day after day, the golden liquid in the furnace turned red. The red glow grew stronger and more intense. Bathed in it, Duir's magic surged. His spiritual realm climbed, his grasp of many magics deepened, and with it, the secret desires in his heart swelled into living illusions. In those visions, he was all-powerful. Sauron crushed beneath his heel, Morgoth humiliated, the Valar bending before him, the world answering to his command. He rose from Maya to Valar, surpassed the Valar, ascended to the realm of Iluvatar, and pierced the void to glimpse the true fabric of magic. He even met the three Peverell brothers and wore Death's mantle to bestow the Hallows. He stood among the founders of Hogwarts. Finally, he returned home as the sole god of that world. The illusions were so vivid that Duir could barely tell dream from reality. He was clinging to the last scrap of sanity, barricading himself inside a fragile mental castle to keep desire from breaking through. Outside the array, Gandalf and Elrond stood beneath the red light, continuously channeling the ring's power toward Duir. Arwen did not leave either. She watched him with rising concern. The conjunction of Venus and Mars lasted far longer than it should have, and people across the central continent who had watched the anomaly slowly grew accustomed to it. 2 months swept by. On the 72nd day of the 4th stage of refining the Philosopher's Stone, most of the golden liquid had become red, only a thin strip of gold remaining. The furnace's red light reached its peak. The glare burst out and painted the summit of Orthanc a fierce crimson. Isengard itself seemed to hold a red star in the tower. Within the grove and precincts, hippogriffs, the three-headed wolf in the tower, Aslan the Griffon, and Shadowfax all squinted up at the glow, comforted rather than unnerved. Their simple minds were untroubled by the swelling desires that the light brought. Even Elrond and Gandalf, masters at the peak of Middle-earth, felt their power rising under the red light. It had been a long time since either had sensed such a sharp growth, but neither took comfort. Their attention remained fixed on Duir, whose struggle inside the array grew more desperate by the day. "Mithrandir," Elrond said, voice tense. "We're outside the array and already feeling the tug of desire. Duir is facing the light directly. His exposure is far greater. I'm afraid he won't hold out. If he slips, we must wake him at once. We can't let desire take him." Gandalf watched Duir's body tremble within the array and nodded. "The longer he holds on, the greater his reward will be. I'll lend him Narya's aid, kindle his courage and hope, lift some of this exhaustion, if he can endure until the end." He slipped the Ring of Fire into action, sending part of its power into Duir. Elrond's frown eased into a faint smile. "He is fortunate. Of the 3 elven rings, Galadriel's is protective, mine is for healing, and your ring, Mithrandir, resists despair and strengthens the spirit. It may be the one to see him through." Narya's flame gave Duir's fatigued spirit a reprieve. His mental castle, wobbling on the edge of collapse, steadied. Courage and hope arrived like warm fuel to a sputtering flame. His last shred of consciousness, buffeted by the storm of desire, flared and regained strength. For a time, the pressure on him eased, and he was pulled back from the brink. But the danger was not over. As the furnace's red liquid multiplied, desire magnified infinitely. Hidden cravings, once buried, rose and clawed at his defenses. Duir felt as though a demon inside him was growing, tirelessly pushing to smash through the gates of his mind and swallow every sliver of reason. He forced himself into a no-thought meditation, using empty stillness as a shield against the torrent. Time stretched until it felt like years. At last, the last thread of gold in the furnace vanished into red. The glaze-like liquid flashed with a final, blinding crimson light and poured over Duir. Desire swelled to its limit and crashed into his mind like a tidal wave, submerging his consciousness. "This is bad. Wake him." Elrond's face went pale. He unleashed the power of his ring, the Ring of Air, pushing it into Duir and hammering his mind with wakeful force. "Duir, wake up!" Gandalf, too, poured every ounce of Narya's strength into him, sending hope and courage to rouse him. But Duir did not respond. His mind was sunk into the deepest layer of illusion. Arwen watched, heart clenched. She had tried everything else, and then she noticed the even star on Duir's chest, the pendant she had once given him. Her expression hardened like a blade. She seemed to reach a decision. A harsh alarm jangled. Duir opened his eyes to a ceiling he recognized, but which felt strangely foreign. For a moment he lay in bewilderment, trying to orient himself. Was this his rented apartment? It had been too long since he'd slept here, or at least it felt that way. He reached for the scene in his head. "I had a dream," he said, half to himself. The memory was like gauze, blurred and fragmentary. "I think I traveled somewhere. Did a lot of things." He smiled and shook his head. "I've been reading too many transmigration novels." He let it go, dragged himself up, brushed his teeth, changed, and headed out. He had breakfast downstairs, then joined the commuting swarm onto the subway, another day of corporate sameness. The routine had hardened into a dull comfort, but late at night, when exhaustion left him empty and unproductive, a small, insistent thought pierced through. This wasn't the life he was meant to live. Sometimes in sleep, a voice seemed to call him. He was too practical to see a psychiatrist. He needed his job. So he kept busy to quiet his mind. Hikes, amusement parks, movies on lonely weekends. One afternoon, he went to the cinema with no strong expectation. Posters told him the new releases didn't appeal. Then he paused at a familiar one, The Lord of the Rings trilogy, 3D IMAX re-release. He'd seen it before and knew the story, but he settled in for the marathon anyway. As the familiar scenes unfolded, he watched with more than idle interest. Something in him tightened. Gandalf, Elrond, the others on screen. They felt like old companions, faces from a life he'd shared intimately for a long time. The feeling wasn't fandom. It was the warmth of family. When Arwen and Aragorn confessed and the crowd around him sighed, a sour twist of jealousy rose up in him. Arwen could not belong to Aragorn. She should belong to him. The thought flashed absurdly. He blinked at himself. Then, mid-scene, the actress playing Arwen seemed to become something else, an elf of incomparable beauty, haloed in starlight. Her eyes pierced the screen and met his. "Dewey, wake up," she said, not to the audience, but to him. "This is not real. Come back. We're waiting." The obscuring veil in his mind tore away. Memory rushed back, and the word on her lips snapped him fully awake. "Arwen." On the screen she smiled, stepped out of the frame, leaned down, and kissed him. Her arms closed around him, and she whispered, "Come back, Dewey. We're all waiting for you." A brilliant light flared and wrapped them both. The cinema, the city, everything collapsed inward, twisted, and then dissolved. When Dewey opened his eyes again, he was back in the magic array. He blinked, dazed, as the red glow washed over him, and the world he had just left hung like a distant echo. Chapter 249, The Philosopher's Stone is finally completed. "Duir, are you all right?" Elrond and Gandalf called from outside the magic circle, concern written on their faces. Arwen lay weak in Elrond's arms, though she watched Duir with worried eyes. After a moment of confusion, Duir blinked back to consciousness. He glanced down at the Evenstar necklace on his chest, its starlight still faintly shimmering, then at Arwen's pale face. Remembering the illusion he had just escaped, he realized she must have done something to pull him out. He stood up on unsteady legs and hurried out of the circle to her side. "What did Arwen do to wake me?" Elrond looked between his daughter and the anxious young man at her side and sighed. "Gandalf and I tried to wake you, but we could not. Seeing your condition was critical, Arwen linked her soul to you through the Evenstar and called you back." "Will that hurt her?" Duir's worry deepened. Elrond shook his head to reassure him. "No permanent harm. She is merely magically overdrawn and will recover after several days' rest. The consequence is that your souls are now connected, closer even than twins. If you are hurt, she will feel it. Take care of her." Duir felt a rush of gratitude and responsibility. "I swear I will never let either of us be hurt." He gently took Arwen from her father, summoned a golden cup, ladled water from a Hildorian stream into it, and helped her drink. The stream's waters were magical. In the golden vessel, their restorative power was amplified. Color returned to her cheeks. She smiled at Duir, weak but steady. "Don't worry, Duir. I'm better now." "Go check the Philosopher's Stone," Elrond said quietly. "Make sure nothing unexpected happened." Duir shook his head. He took a soothing potion from his space pouch, infused it into the golden cup, and coaxed it to Arwen's lips. She drank obediently. Her strength returned more quickly. Gandalf watched them, beaming. "How touching," he murmured, "always rushing to each other's side." When Arwen could stand, Duir turned his attention to the mithril furnace in the center of the circle. The dragon blood flames had long since died out. Inside, floating quietly, was a red gem the size of a baby's fist, an uncut, irregular ruby that glowed faintly from within. Duir lifted it into his hand and felt the power thrumming beneath the surface, a fusion of spirit, soul, and life with the four elements, earth, air, water, fire, and the influences of Elenmer, Mercury, Lumbar, Saturn, the star of Andal, Venus, and the star of Carnal, Mars. It was unlike anything he had known, pure, creative energy. "Elrond, Duir, congratulations," Elrond said with a warm smile. "You have made a perfect Philosopher's Stone. It passed every trial without flaw." A flawless stone required the alchemist to undergo every inner transformation and attain a rare mental harmony. Duir had not quite reached that inner state, but the soul link with Arwen at the final moment had awakened him from the illusion and allowed the last metamorphosis to complete. It was, in a way, a fortunate accident, a shortcut that still produced a flawless result. Elrond's praise and the gem in his palm made Duir's heart leap. He thought of Nicholas Flamel, whose stone had been imperfect, granting immortality but not eternal youth, leaving his body to age into frailty until he chose to destroy it rather than become a living corpse. A perfect stone, however, offered true eternal youth, yet even then it could not work alone. The stone enabled creation of an elixir of eternal youth, which must be consumed continuously. If the elixir stopped, the drinker would resume normal aging and die. The stone also enabled transmutation of base metals into gold. Eager to test the latter, Duir found an iron rod and pressed the stone to it. Nothing happened. He frowned, then channeled magic through the stone. The gem flared red, and the iron rod shimmered, shifting quickly into a gleaming golden bar. With a practiced swipe, he cast a cutting spell and split the bar cleanly in two. It did not revert. This was true gold. Gandalf laughed. You, Duir, can now be called the richest person in Middle-earth. With a philosopher's stone, you can make as much gold as you like. Arwen grinned, mischief in her eyes. Smaug will be the happiest of all. He'll be running a business to keep his hoard replenished. Imagine him bossing spiders to weave cloth non-stop. Elrond and Gandalf chuckled. They both remembered Smaug's obsessive love of gold. Duir, though amused, knew practical limits. Transmuting mountains of metal into gold would still demand vast magical resources. The stone made it possible, but not effortless. With the success of the transmutation and the completion of the stone, Elrond and Gandalf's work was done. As Elrond prepared to return to Rivendell, Duir stopped him. Holding out the Philosopher's Stone, he spoke with quiet solemnity. Lord Elrond, I beg your hearing. I love Arwen. She is my heart and my purpose. I ask for your permission to make her my wife. In earnest, I offer this Philosopher's Stone as my betrothal gift. I swear to cherish and protect her all my life. Arwen covered her mouth in surprise. Tears sprang to her eyes. Gandalf, smiling, offered his blessing. Elrond studied the earnest young man and the stone he offered. Under the customs of Middle-earth, a betrothal gift becomes the bride's private property, not part of the groom's holdings. Duir's willingness to give the stone, even at risk to his own immortality, moved Elrond. After a quiet moment, Elrond's expression softened. I once told you that if you could achieve immortality, I would allow you to marry my daughter. You have created the Philosopher's Stone. You have fulfilled your promise. I have no reason to object. You may take my most precious jewel, protect her, and give her happiness. One condition, Arwen added, soft but firm. The formalities cannot be skipped. A person of standing must come to Rivendell to represent you, witnesses must sign a marriage contract, and a date must be set. Only then will I be given. Duir nodded eagerly. Gandalf stepped forward with a bright laugh. I will serve as proxy and officiant. I think I am qualified. Of course, Duir said without hesitation. There is no one more fitting. Elrond agreed. The decision settled happily among them, laughter and plans already beginning to form. Far from their joy, in Mordor, Barad-dûr's great eye fixed upon Isengard in the west. Beneath the tower lay a dragon 1,000 meters long, its iron crown radiating a bone-cold chill that froze lesser creatures around it. Saruman stood upon its broad back, staff in hand. Around them, dozens of other dragons, wrapped in black mist and each with vast spectral eyes, prepared to fly. On the backs of several crossbred mounts, dragon-like creatures with fellbeast traits rode ringwraiths. Depart, Sauron commanded. The great crowned dragon beat its wings and rose. The winged dragons followed, while the wingless beasts bore dense ranks of orcs, filling the sky as they surged westward out of Mordor. Chapter 250, Mordor Raid. Gondor and Mordor were mainly divided by the Mountains of Shadow. To the west of those mountains lay Ithilien, a once lush region of Gondor that served as the buffer between the two realms. Ithilien was bounded by the Anduin on the west, the Mountains of Shadow on the east, the Dead Marshes to the north, and the Poros to the south. In earlier days it had been called the Garden of Gondor. Minas Ithil once controlled the pass into Mordor. But as Gondor declined, Ithilien fell into ruin. Minas Ithil was seized and turned into Minas Morgul, and for a century the fortress stood on constant alert. Apart from occasional roving bands of orcs, no large-scale war had erupted, until now. On this day, an immense army poured out from Minas Morgul. Dark ranks streamed through the pass at Cirith Ungol and surged over the Mountains of Shadow toward Ithilien. Among them was the same orc company Duir had encountered when he went to gather the silk of Shelob. When Duir, disguised as an orc, had gone into Shelob's lair and never returned, the sentries concluded he had been eaten. After a vicious scramble for command, a stronger orc rose to lead the band. Before he could enjoy his brief authority, he was ordered to join the Great Muster. Like so much expendable muscle in the endless struggle between Mordor and Gondor, that company was swallowed up by the larger war and died silently. To invade Gondor, Mordor's army had to cross the Anduin, and there was only one convenient place to do so, the bridge at Osgiliath. Osgiliath, The ancient capital straddled the river, its east and west districts linked by a great bridge. For generations, the bridge had changed hands. Recently, Gondor had abandoned the east bank, holding fast only to the west district. After Gandalf had warned the regent of Gondor of Sauron's renewed threat, Gondor had reinforced its garrison and guarded the west district more carefully. But long absence of large-scale war bred complacency. They had hoped for peace. Now tens of thousands of orcs massed on the opposite bank in the East District and poured across the bridge in a dark flood. The Gondor defenders, roused as from sleep, rushed to meet them and sent urgent riders to Minas Tirith for aid. The orcs reached the gates of the West District and set up scaling ladders, attempting to overwhelm the walls. Gondor's men shut the gates, manned the battlements, and rained arrows down, tearing ladders apart and sending many orcs tumbling into the Anduin. For a time, the defenders' advantage of height took heavy toll, and repeated assaults were beaten back. Then, as the defenders caught their breath, the attack shifted. The orcs fell back at a signal, and a series of massive trolls charged forward, carrying huge black iron balls. Under a storm of arrows, they hauled these balls up to the gate and set them in place. A burning fuse hissed along each one. Had Duir been there, he would have recognized the smell and the spark immediately. Gunpowder. Saruman had taught Mordor that dreadful craft, and the trolls had become living incendiaries. Gondor's soldiers had never faced such weapons. Instinct alone drove them to try to stop the trolls, but arrows did no more than sting the beasts' thick hides. With a thunderous blast, the gate was blown apart. The earth shuddered, and countless defenders were killed or wounded in an instant. A feral cheer rose from the orc ranks as they surged through the breach and into the West District. The fighting inside the city was brutal. Gondor's men resisted, but wave after wave of orcs poured in across the bridge and pressed them back. The West District teetered on the brink. Seeing the danger, the city commander made a desperate decision: repulse this assault at any cost, then destroy the bridge. He personally led a charge. Seeing their leader move, the defenders' spirits surged. They cut their way out and fought across the bridge. Men and orcs plunged into the river amid screams and the clash of steel. But fortune betrayed them. The commander was struck by an errant orc arrow and fell with his horse into the torrent. Without him, the defenders faltered. They could not bring down the bridge's supports in time, and morale collapsed. Routed, the defenders could not hold. After a day and a night of slaughter, the West District fell. With Osgiliath taken, the Anduin was no longer a barrier. The Mordor host now had a staging ground for an advance into the Pelennor fields and a direct path toward Minas Tirith. Messengers rode for the capital with the grim tidings. The regent of Gondor, alarmed beyond measure, ordered Minas Tirith to be fully defended and lit the northern beacons, calling for aid from Rohan. Gondor's beacon hills, 7 in all along the White Mountains, flared one by one after the first was kindled near Minas Tirith. Yellow smoke curled up, then bright flames leapt from ridge to ridge, a line of signal fire that could be seen for leagues. In Edoras, King Thengel watched the first blaze and felt a pang of helplessness. Rohan itself was under attack. An orc army of more than 10,000 had surged out of the Black Gate in northwest Mordor, joined by the Easterlings, and was sweeping toward his borders. Thengel was trapped between treaty and necessity. The old compact told him that Rohan must come when Gondor called, but Rohan could not abandon its own defenses. In the end, the king sent 1,000 horsemen to Gondor with an explanation, then set about mustering every levy and ally he could. "We still have that wizard to our west," the new chief advisor said. "He commands Dunlendings as well. Should we seek his help?" Thengel had seen worrying signs for months: the strange astrological disturbances and the exposed spy from Saruman. He had also been impressed by Duir, the mysterious and powerful black wizard who had recently surfaced. He nodded and took pen in hand. If Isengard could be brought into the fight, Rohan's plight might be eased. He wrote a heartfelt letter and could barely contain his urgency as the fastest rider was sent for Isengard. Duir and Gandalf, however, learned of Osgiliath before Edoras did. The regent of Gondor had called upon Gandalf through the Palantir of Minas Tirith. Gandalf also had in his possession the Seeing Stone that had once belonged to Saruman. The message came straight into their hands. Both men frowned at the news. Duir felt a chill of unease. In the histories he knew, Mordor's great offensive culminated in the War of the Ring. Why had such an attack been launched so soon? Gandalf was gravely concerned. He puffed his pipe, feeling the weight of confusion and dread. "What has changed?" he asked aloud. "Sauron should not be fully recovered. Why this haste to strike at Gondor now?" There was no time to puzzle it out. Gandalf stood and, turning to Duir, said, "I'm sorry, Duir. I cannot be your proxy at Rivendell to plead for Arwen's hand. I must ride to Gondor at once. Minas Tirith must not fall. If it does, all of Middle-earth will be imperiled." Duir expected nothing less. He shook his head. "No apology is needed. Rivendell can wait. If Gondor is besieged, Lord Elrond will be troubled as well. This is not a fit time for a marriage proposal. Go, we can deal with that later." Gandalf managed a small smile. "When this is over, I will go to Rivendell myself and do my best to win you your Arwen." Duir asked, "Will you go alone? Do you need me to come?" Gandalf answered calmly, "My purpose must be to inspire Gondor's people, to organize and rally them against the darkness. I can do that best alone. I am also concerned that with Mordor on the march, Saruman may seize the chance to make his move against Isengard. I need you to stay here, to watch Isengard and guard against Saruman." Duir no longer protested. Gandalf's warning was sensible. Saruman had already been treacherous once, rescued back to Mordor like a hound after his foul aspirations had been revealed. It would be folly to assume he would sit idly by while Mordor marched on Gondor. So their paths were set, Gandalf to Minas Tirith, Duir to keep watch to the west, and the drums of war beat louder across Middle-earth. Gandalf had been ready to do something reckless. The urgency of Gondor's plight made even Shadowfax's steady speed feel slow. For a wild moment, he considered abandoning the horse and flying over the White Mountains on a broom, straight to Minas Tirith. Dewey stopped him. "That would still take too long," Dewey said calmly. "I can make a portkey. It won't drop you into the very heart of Gondor, but it will shortcut the distance." Gandalf's face brightened. "With your magic, that would be far better." Dewey produced a mithril ring and touched it with his wand. "Mentos," he intoned. The ring quivered and glowed faintly blue. "I've bound a portkey to it," Dewey explained, handing the ring to Gandalf. "Give it a little of your power to activate it, and it will transport you into Gondor. It's reusable. Activate it again, and it will bring you back to Isengard should you need to." Gandalf accepted the gift gratefully, sliding the ring onto the index finger of his left hand beside the ring of fire. He grinned. "If I weren't an old man, someone might get the wrong idea. I hope Arwen won't be jealous. After all, she isn't the first you've given a ring to." Dewey fell silent. A flicker of an odd memory crossed him, of the Gandalf he'd known only from another life, a man whose tastes had been peculiar, and it made the joke feel strangely incongruous. Gandalf noticed Dewey's strange look, but had no time to wonder at it. He was about to mount Shadowfax and use the ring when a sharp cry from the sky cut the moment short. Aslan, the griffon that patrolled high above Isengard, had sounded a clear, urgent cry. Dewey's brow tightened. With his talent for legilimency, he could read more than just the alarm. He peered toward the horizon. "Aslan sees riders coming from the east, people of Rohan," he said. "They are heading for Isengard." Gandalf did not leave. "Gondor is in peril," he said, "and now the Rohirrim come here. I fear Rohan has met with trouble as well." They did. Soon, a mounted contingent, dusty and hurried, rode up to the gates. At their head was a man in his 30s who spoke with the etiquette of a courtier. "Lord Duir, I am Forkry, cousin to King Thengel," he said with a bow. "Gondor called for aid, and we answered, but now tens of thousands of orcs and Easterlings press upon us from the east. We cannot spare the troops Gondor needs." He drew himself up, voice steady. "You are our neighbor and a known power in Rohan. On behalf of King Thengel, I ask for your help." He handed Dewey a sealed letter. Dewey opened it and read. His expression shifted to surprise. Gandalf, watching, asked, "What does King Thengel offer that is so striking?" Dewey turned the letter over to Gandalf. "He promises the entire gap of Rohan, down to the fords of Isen, if I will aid them." Gandalf's eyes widened. The gap of Rohan, the wide valley between the misty and white mountains, included the fords of Isen, a strategic corridor connecting Rohan, Gondor, and the lands beyond. Control of that pass would cut communications and isolate kingdoms. That King Thengel would offer such ground was astonishing. Gandalf did not press the matter further. The choice was Dewey's. Dewey looked up at Brog, leader of the Dunlendings, who had come with the Rowan contingent. Since their surrender to him, the Dunlendings had settled the grasslands around Isengard and formed the first line of defense against uninvited guests. Dewey's voice was level. Brog, you have heard King Thengel's terms. This is your decision. If you will send your warriors to Rohan, the Gap of Rohan and the fords of Isen will be yours to live on. If not, we let the matter drop. He did not mean to go to the front himself. Isengard still needed watching. Nor did he force Brog. Though the Dunlendings were autonomous, Dewey had no intention of stripping them of their independence. Yet he hoped they would accept. Control of the fords would ensure the Dunlendings secure land and a steady income, and fighting alongside the Rohirrim might finally thaw a centuries-old enmity. Brog stood in a hard, inner conflict. He was a leader who cared for his people. He had once even ridden to the gates of Edoras in those tense old days. He did not relish risking his tribesmen's lives for the Rohirrim. He admitted privately he would rather their foes swallow them all, but the offer of permanent land was a chance no Dunlending could ignore. After a long silence, he met Dewey's eyes. Lord, the Dunlendings will aid Rohan. On the field, we will not take orders from them. Dewey's mouth curved. He had expected that. Brog's condition was predictable and yet acceptable, allied but not commanded. Gandalf smiled with approval. The Rohirrim, who had long looked down on the Dunlendings as barbarians, visibly relaxed. If the Dunlendings fought with them, they would have a far better chance against Mordor. Since you will aid Rohan, Dewey said, I will not send you empty. He drew the horn of victory to his lips and blew. The note rang deep and far, rolling through the trees and over the plains. From the forest came answering sounds, sharp cries and the beating of great wings. Dozens of hippogriffs broke cover, circling once before, banking down toward Isengard. They were massive animals, 3 meters tall at the shoulder, a 6-meter wingspan, bodies part eagle, part horse, each the size of a small elephant. The Rohirrim and the Dunlendings watched in open-mouthed wonder as the beasts ran up and halted gracefully before their new master. Dewey, stroking the lead beast's beak, addressed Brog. These are yours to ride into battle, but hippogriffs are proud creatures. Ordinary men do not win their trust. Whatever man wishes to mount must win its acceptance. Interest turned to excitement. Brog asked quickly, how does one win it? Choose one and stand 2 paces away, Dewey said. Bow to it and keep your eyes on it. If it bows back, it has accepted you. Then you may approach and mount. If it does not bow, do not press. Back away slowly. If you provoke it, it will strike with its talons and you will be killed. Brog walked to the lead hippogriff, the only one with a name, Buckbeak, the first Dewey had ever bred. The beast paced nervously, scratching the ground with a clawed forefoot. Brog stopped within 2 meters, held Brog's gaze, and bowed slowly. Buckbeak watched, then, after what seemed an age, extended a foreleg and lowered its head. Dewey's surprise was plain. Congratulations, Brog. Buckbeak accepts you. Brog's joy was evident as he reached out and touched the creature's beak, then struggled to clamber up onto the broad, feathered back. Other Dunlendings tried in turn. Some succeeded, others failed, and were clawed before Dewey or his men intervened. Those who failed watched with envy as companions took to the air. Dewey then produced bolts of spider silk mail, light, flexible armor woven like gossamer, yet resistant to ordinary blades, and distributed them among the Dunlendings. He also handed over the secret weapons Saruman had forged in Orthanc. With hippogriffs under saddle, spider silk armor on their backs, and arms to match, a fully equipped Dunlending force stood ready, a new, dangerous ally to ride forth for Rohan. Chapter 252, Early Warning. The Dunlendings assembled with impressive speed, forming a fully armed cavalry. Brog, their chieftain, and a dozen of the tribe's strongest warriors rode atop hippogriffs. Weighing the long journey and the rapidly changing battlefront, Dewey produced several trunks expanded with the undetectable extension charm and loaded all the Dunlending horsemen and the Rohan contingent inside. Only a dozen of the Dunlending warriors, those who had earned the hippogriff's favor, and the leader of the relief mission, a cousin of the king of Rohan, remained mounted. They rode hard for Edoras, Rohan's capital, to raise support. When someone asked why Dewey hadn't used portkeys to move them, He explained simply, even drained bare, his magic couldn't teleport so many men and horses. Between the Dunlending's scent and the Rohan mounts, the numbers already topped 10,000. Portkey teleportation devoured his power, and each extra person or animal raised the cost. A few hundred he could manage, 10,000 was beyond him. With the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim gone, only Duir remained at Isengard. Gandalf had already used a portkey to go to Gondor as soon as the Dunlendings agreed to help, intending to organize Gondor's defense against Mordor's invasion. Aslan, keep a sharp eye these next few days. Patrol the area and warn me if you see anything, Duir said, stroking the hippogriff's head. Aslan was almost unnervingly intelligent. He could not speak human language, but in everything else he behaved like a thinking being. He nodded, rubbed Duir's hand, then launched into the sky, circling Isengard and watching the countryside with raptor-keen vision. Duir crossed to Orthanc, patted the three-headed wolf, and instructed, Cerberus, stay alert, don't let anyone slip close. The two heads that had been napping straightened, the beast rose, howling its pledge. Duir laughed and rewarded the animal with pats to each head. Cerberus's 6 eyes gleamed, its tail thumped, and it took up station on the tower's first floor, 3 heads pointing in different directions. On the tower platform, Duir stared east, his brows tight. Mordor's sudden strike at Gondor and Rohan had caught him off guard and left him unsettled. Sauron did not act without reason. He was subtle and patient, the sort to hide in shadow, waiting for the precise moment to strike, as he had done after the War of the Last Alliance. Even after that ancient defeat, he had lingered for ages, rebuilding his strength in secret. That cunning suggested this invasion was more than a simple land grab. Since creating the Philosopher's Stone and the profound change in his soul that followed, Duir's instincts had sharpened. He trusted them as completely as Gandalf and Galadriel trusted theirs. Whatever this move by Mordor meant, it demanded preparation. Duir mounted his staff, slipped on the Ring of Power, and tapped Orthanc's amplifying energies. He intoned spells, Protego Maxima, Protego Horribilis, fortifying charms, and complex sigils streamed from the tip of his staff. With Orthanc as the focal point and Isengard's circular wall as the perimeter, a great white webbed dome blossomed into being around the tower. The Philosopher's Stone's completion had transformed Duir's soul, mind, and body. His magic had roughly doubled. Raw power now approached that of Dumbledore and Voldemort. Even so, casting a protective dome large enough to cover Isengard required the ring, the staff, and everything Orthanc could lend. When it was done, Duir sagged with exhaustion. The dome itself, delicate as a cicada wing, proved extraordinarily robust. Ordinary magical attacks could not break it, and any hostile force that tried to force its way in would be reduced to ash. Duir had also adapted the barrier using Grindelwald's Fiendfire improvements so that friends or those with good intent could pass through unharmed. When the wards were secure, Duir drew out the golden cup and summoned clear water. He palmed the Philosopher's Stone and stirred it into the cup. The water fired to ruby red like wine. One long gulp restored the power and vitality he had expended. The cup replenished the body, the stone restored magic. Together, they prevented weariness and stagnation. He held the ruby gem and let his mind run. If Mordor had not intervened, he would already be in the potion room on Weathertop, distilling his elixir of immortality. The stone itself could not directly grant immortality, but it was the crucial ingredient for the elixir. A single batch extended life by 30 years. With enough supply and continued use, one could essentially become ageless. More than Flamel's stone, Duir's was perfect. It promised not only extended life, but preserved youth. Once he took the elixir, his body's functions would freeze at his current age. And yet another thought rang cold in him. What if Mordor's sudden offensive aimed not simply at Gondor and Rohan, but at the Philosopher's Stone in his possession? He knew that the stone could restore a physical body. Voldemort had tried to seize Hogwarts Stone for that reason in Harry Potter's first year. Sauron's situation resembled Voldemort's. Both had become bodiless spirits who relied on objects, the Horcruxes or the One Ring, to cling to existence. In the Second Age, Sauron had been stripped of his physical form for his crimes, yet the One Ring later allowed him to rebuild a body. The One Ring was the obvious means for Sauron to reclaim flesh, but the Philosopher's Stone offered an alternative path to the same end. Dewey remembered Sauron's earlier probing while the stone was taking shape. Galadriel had intercepted that spy attempt, but even a glimpse might have been enough for Sauron to divine the stone's power. Sauron's ancient vision and craft were not to be underestimated. The thought tightened Dewey's chest. He had expected only Saruman, bitter, resentful, eager to seize Isengard back, to take advantage of the chaos. If Ringwraiths or Sauron himself intervened, fleeing and abandoning Isengard might be the only sane choice. Still, he had a contingency: the fireplaces. If Sauron appeared, Dewey could ignite the network and call Lothlorien and Rivendell. With Galadriel, Elrond, Glorfindel, and other mighty elves ready, even Sauron would not be invincible. They had driven him from Dol Guldur once. They could do it again. But Isengard in itself felt thinly garrisoned. Just Dewey, Aslan, and Cerberus. He needed allies at hand. Dewey produced the Horn of Victory, a gift from the blue wizard Romastamo, and blew. The note was not loud, but it carried far. Above Weathertop, a dragon woke. Smaug, nestled amid his golden hoard, opened one lidless eye. He rose, sloughed from his lair, and pierced the sky through the dragon passage. The basilisk, groaning awake in the Chamber of Secrets, slithered out through the pipes and surfaced in the Black Lake at the mountain's foot. Villagers in Hogsmeade pointed as the dragon swooped out of the castle, extended claws, and plucked the basilisk from the water. The two did not struggle. The long Serpent King wrapped around Smaug's leg and went with him in flight to the southeast. Even swifter than the dragon came Thorondor, the great eagle. Hearing the summons, he flew at full speed toward Isengard. Only the Kraken remained, still coiled in the Black Lake, maintaining its watch over the castle's watery defenses. Dewey watched them go, the weight of foreboding still heavy, and the knowledge settling in that the coming days would require every ally he could muster. The eastern border of Rohan was a scene of desperate, brutal fighting. From the Black Gate of Mordor came a tide of soldiers, orcs, Easterlings, Uruk-hai, pouring across the dead marshes and sweeping down toward the Anduin. The attack had been sudden and overwhelming. Rohan's river defenses along the Anduin were thinly held and were quickly pushed back by numbers they could not match. In a last-ditch effort, the Rohan commanders destroyed the bridge, hoping to stall the enemy, but Mordor had planned for this and brought countless boats. Under volleys of Rohan arrows, those boats still pushed through, wave after wave, and enough orcs reached the far bank to break the defenders' line. The Rohirrim fell back to the Antwash, the second natural barrier to the east. A rotten little bridge burned behind them as they made their stand. Across that river lay an open plain, and beyond it, the low hill of Edoras itself, with no strong walls to shelter the capital. If Mordor crossed the Antwash unchecked, they would be able to sweep across the plain straight to the royal city. King Thengel had personally ridden out to the river to marshal his forces, but the muster was incomplete. Many spears of Rohan were scattered across the country and could not be brought to the field in time. Today their numbers showed only a fraction of Mordor's. Mordor pressed the assault quickly. Where the Antwash ran shallower than the Anduin, vast trolls waded into the current and laid heavy planks across their backs to form crude causeways. From the opposite bank, the enemy surged, the river full of orcs and makeshift rafts. "Loose! Shoot the trolls! Aim for their heads!" King Thengel cried, watching the monstrous shapes supporting the crossing. Arrows thudded into tough, leathery hides and did little. Only when the Rohirrim hauled out great ballistae and drove bronze bolts into skulls did some trolls keel over, tearing the planks and drowning the folk who rode them. Thengel himself loosed an arrow and struck one troll in the eye. It howled, flung the timber and the orcs on it aside, and was swept downstream. Still, the enemy continued to pour across in such mass that the defenders were compelled to fall back again and again. A messenger, sweating and bloody, fought his way to Thengel's side. "Your Majesty, retreat! Mordor's numbers are too great. We cannot hold them here," he shouted between breaths, parrying an orc thrust with his sword. Thengel cut down an Uruk-hai with his greatsword and shook his head. His jaw was set. "Behind us is Edoras," he answered. "If we retire now, we surrender everything. Rohan cannot be abandoned." The thought of the royal city, undefended, full of his people and kin, steeled his resolve. For a moment, his eyes scanned the western sky as if searching for a miracle. The only hope he could think of lay with the Wizard of Isengard. Perhaps Duir would ride in and turn the tide. But as orcs continued to cross and Rohirrim fell, his hope thinned like a candle in the wind. Then, without warning, a cry rent the air, the keening, powerful shriek of great birds. All eyes looked up. A dozen hippogriffs came tearing through the clouds like bolts of thunder, their massive wings throwing wind across the plain. They struck into the enemy ranks like living battering rams, talons rending trolls, bodies tumbling. On their backs rode Dunlending warriors, broad-shouldered men led by Brog, their chieftain, loosing longbows and picking commanders and banners from the Mordor lines. The field changed in an instant. The dread of Mordor's numbers collapsed into chaos as those hawk horses carved lanes through the attackers. Arrows from the ground rose uselessly. The hippogriff's speed and altitude made most missiles moot. On the ground, the Rohirrim and the new riders surged forward. "Your Majesty! It's me, Fockerui!" A familiar shout came from a mount. Fockerui rode up, flushed and triumphant. A Dunlending companion on the same hippogriff had already loosed an arrow and killed an orc who had crept close to Thengel in the confusion. The Dunlending's sharp eyes had saved the king in that instant, a fact that nearly made Fockerui draw his blade in panic. "Where is Duir? Has the wizard come?" Thengel asked, hope sharpened in his voice. Fockerui shook his head. "Not Duir, your majesty. He did not come himself, but he sent us." The king's hope faltered at the lack of the wizard's presence, but the words that followed made his face change. And, not alone, the Dunlendings brought more than a dozen of these mounts. They brought 10,000 men, well-equipped, and they ride fast. From beyond the plain came the sound of a great release. The riders dropped heavy crates from their saddles, the boxes smashed open on the grass and, to the astonishment of the orcs, folded out into horses and men. From the chests poured armored Dunlendings on sleek war horses. Their armor shimmered and yet was light, woven, Fockerui explained, from the silk of great spiders, the fabric bending against blades and arrows that might otherwise have pierced. The Dunlendings hit the Mordor lines with savage precision. Where the hippogriffs tore down trolls and hurled them back into the enemy, the mounted Dunlendings plunged like spears into orc hosts. Spider silk mail repelled slashes that would have killed ordinary riders. The Rohirrim, inspired, surged in alongside them. Brog split his forces. Half the hippogriffs swept over the river, shooting down every boat and storming the crude bridges. The other half circled to the enemy rear and struck at the Mordor command. Panic spread through the invaders. With their supply of boats destroyed and bridges smashed by winged riders, many of those who had crossed the Ontwash found their retreat severed. Some leapt into the river, only to be taken by the strong current and pulled under. Others were cut down where they stood. When Brog, from the sky, found and felled the enemy general with a single arrow and tore down his banner, Mordor's forces fragmented into flight. Rohan and Dunlending could not give hot chase across the river. The current and ruined banks made pursuit slow, but they had sliced away nearly half of the invading force and forced the rest to scatter eastward. The Rohirrim, who had expected their nation to be overrun and their people lost, cheered like men released from a nightmare. The old contempt many Rohirrim had held for the Dunlendings suddenly turned to gratitude and awe. When Brog landed and dismounted, the two chiefs met. Thengel stepped forward, earnest and humbled. "Chieftain Brog," he said, voice thick with relief, "you have my thanks. Rohan will remember this day. From now on, the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim will be neighbors in peace." Brog's gaze was sharp and unreadable a moment longer, but then he extended his hand. The centuries of enmity between the peoples, long and bloody, took a decisive turn in that handshake. For a brief, glittering moment, the two leaders were allies. The jubilation lasted only a heartbeat. Without warning, the light dimmed. The hippogriffs shuddered and whinnied, uneasy where they stood. Even the battle-hardened Dunlends on their backs could not calm them. All looked up. The sky blotted out, heavy clouds rolling in as though the world had been shuttered. A roar, not of wind nor of any beast they had known, shook the ground. From the black of the clouds there came a shape so vast the heart of any man would have stood still. A dragon, impossible in size, uncoiling like some living mountain, descended out of the storm. Its scales were like midnight. Cold seemed to pour from its body, frosting the air wherever it passed. It was a thing of nightmare and awe, a darkness falling toward them with an aura of chill and death. On the riverbank, the laughter died in every throat. The victory at the Ontwash had bought time and blood, but whatever had come out of the clouds was not of any band from Mordor they had faced before. The Rohirrim and the Dunlendings turned as one to meet this new terror, and for a moment the world waited. Chapter 254, The Siege of Isengard. When the black dragon rose out of the clouds, panic swept through the riders like a winter gust. Horses reared and bolted, some collapsed in terror. Even Brog, leader of the Dunlendings, looked stripped of all his customary bluster. He had faced Smaug once in the stories of old, but this thing dwarfed any dragon he had imagined. For a breathless moment, everyone simply watched as it moved, a living shadow crossing the sky, and then, to their astonishment, it flew on, heading west. Relief was brief. Dozens more dragons followed, each the size of small hills, wings beating up gusts that carried snow. Although they did not swoop down upon them, their passage was a threat in itself. King Thengel felt the chill of a looming omen. He followed the dragon's course with his eyes and saw where they headed, and his heart sank. "Isengard," he whispered to Brog, who rode beside him. "Do you see where they're going?" Brog's jaw tightened. The dragons had the feel of Mordor about them, black scales, riders in shadow. He had seen men atop some of their backs. "Yes," he said, "they fly for Isengard." "You would go back?" Thengel asked, incredulous. "Those dragons, the lead one looked 10 times the size of Smaug. If you return now, you will be riding to your deaths." Brog's face did not change. Loyalty ran deep among his people. "Lord Duir has aided us," he answered. "Isengard is in danger. We swore to be his allies. We cannot sit idly by." Folkred, Thengel's cousin and third marshal of the Rohirrim, urged caution. "Your Majesty, let us pursue the routed forces of Mordor. They are broken. We can cut them down before the Anduin." Thengel weighed for a heartbeat, then made his decision. "We cannot forget Isengard's help to us," he said. "Half of our horse will continue east to finish the route. The other half will ride back with Brog to aid Isengard." Folkred protested. "It is far safer for me to lead the aid. Your Majesty, you should continue pursuit." But Thengel's resolve held. He turned to Brog. "Leader Brog, you came to our aid. We owe you the same. If your wagons can carry more, fit them with Rohan men. If not, we will ride." Brog blinked in surprise. He had expected gratitude from Rohan, perhaps pay for land, but not such courage. The decision struck a new chord of respect in him. He ordered the Dunlendings to crowd together, cleared a hold in one of the great boxes they used for transport, and handed it to the king. Thengel watched in astonishment as thousands of Rohirrim were secured within. The magic of Wizard Duir's boxes made troop movement almost trivial. With that, he swung up onto a hippogriff beside Brog, and the mixed force turned west toward Isengard. Above Orthanc, the air had already gone still. Duir had seen the eastern horizon darken and the clouds rolling toward Isengard. His griffin Aslan let out a sharp alarm. The bird's cry was small and high, like a splinter of ice. The clouds were not ordinary weather. They carried a scent of old winter, and out of them a terrible head appeared, a black dragon, vast as a mountain, breath like a gale of frost. The dragon exhaled. A column of frigid vapor struck the invisible dome of magic that cloaked Isengard and crystallized upon it. The dome flashed as if glazed with ice. Frost leapt across the trees. Dew froze on blades of grass. Duir's own breath turned to mist. He had seen dragons. Smaug had been legend enough, but this was something different. Its power felt primeval and colder than any fire. It carried a human rider. Saruman's voice rolled down from the dragon's back, like thunder over a frozen plain. "Duir," he called, "today I take back what is mine. Are you prepared to feel my vengeance?" Duir's eyes narrowed. He could see Saruman, and beside him, the black shapes of the Nazgul, 8 of them seated on the necks of the leading dragons. The Witch King's presence chilled the air itself. "Think that dragon or your Nazgul makes you invincible?" Duir said. He drew the Philosopher's Stone and lifted it, its inner light like a tiny captured sun. "Is that what the Dark Lord wants?" The Nazgul answered with a voice that scraped the heart. "Give us the stone you forged, wizard. The Master promises you everything you desire." The Witch King's gaze wavered at the sight of the stone. To the Nazgul, spirit-bound and hungry for form, A tool that could restore flesh and shape was beyond temptation. Their silent hunger showed in their movements, like wolves suddenly smelling blood. Duir let the stone hang from his fingers a moment longer, then slipped it away with a smile. "You would have it?" he said loudly. "Then kill Saruman. Bring me his head, and perhaps I will consider giving the stone to your master. Or I can tell him how to make one for himself. Your own might be less convincing." A ripple of stunned silence went along the ranks of black riders. The Nazgul turned their cruel attention to Saruman, weighing Duir's words like a blade. Saruman's face contorted with rabid fury. "Fools," he snarled. "Do not listen to him. Kill him. Capture that thing, and the stone will be ours anyway." With that, he released the dragons. A storm of wings closed in from every quarter. Duir did not flinch. When the first dragon struck the dome, it found its way blocked as if by a hand of light. Then, with a terrible keening, its wings blackened and turned to ash, its hide blistered, and its great body tumbled, broken, into the courtyard, still living but grievously burnt. The sight cowed the attackers for the briefest instant. Duir's voice dropped to a single cold syllable. A lethal spell lanced out from him. The wounded dragon's cry became a raw, high scream, then a black, misty thing, an evil spirit of some kind, poured from the dragon's torn flank and rushed for the dome. It struck and exploded against the wards in a burst of darkness and sound. Saruman answered with his own power. He urged the great frost drake beneath him to hurl its freezing breath again, and raised his staff to fling great globes of fire. The Nazgul called their own shadow words and sent them slamming into Duir's wards. The dome shivered and thrummed under the assault. "Count on numbers?" Saruman spat. "Watch what my allies can do." Duir's jaw tightened. He brought forth the horn of victory and blew. The note was not of war but of command, long, pure, and ringing, and the sound struck every ear as a blade of sound. Outside, dragons staggered as if deafened, their riders pulling them back. From the misty mountains, a roar answered the horn. Dragons poured from their mountain caves, drawn by the summoning, and wheel after wheel they arrived above Isengard, hissing flame into the massed ranks of Saruman's black brood. The two skies met in fire and frost, and the siege of Isengard began in earnest. Chapter 255, Dragon War. The sudden arrival of Dui's dragons caught Saruman and his forces off guard. Dui's beasts swept in, spewing conflagrations at Saruman's mounts. Saruman's dragons were all cold-blooded breeds, unable to breathe fire and lacking the frost dragon's freezing breath, relying only on claws and teeth. Compared to Dui's full-blooded fire breathers, they were outclassed from the start. The two wings collided in a furious tangle. Dui's dragons quickly took the advantage, shredding Saruman's smaller drakes in midair and incinerating those they could reach. Saruman's mounts roared in pain and confusion, slashed on slender necks or torn open by talons. Dragon blood rained down. In short order, several of Saruman's dragons plummeted, destroyed. But Dui's side paid for every victory. The dragons ridden by the 8 ringwraiths were hybrids, dragon fellbeast crossbreeds. They had neither frost nor flame, but they retained the fellbeast's terrifying, dizzying shriek. The sound blasted through the air like a weapon. Dui's dragons faltered, quivered in flight, as if the sky itself had turned to ice. Saruman's drakes seized those moments, lunging in with lethal precision. Ringwraiths dropped like shadows onto their foes, stabbing deadly, venom-slick Morgul blades into dragon chests. A shriek, an instant of silence, then the carcass fell tumbling to the ground. Soon both sides were littered with wreckage, dozens of fallen dragons, torn flesh, and smoking scales. Dui and Saruman watched the carnage, each feeling the sting of loss. Saruman's face twisted between fury and disbelief. He had not expected Dui to have dragons of his own. Worse, most of Saruman's mounts were cold-blooded models, while Dui's were full-fledged fire-breathers, stronger, faster, more deadly. The pride of Saruman's aerial host was suddenly diminished. Atop Orthanc, Dui braced within his dome shield, but even the barrier could not entirely block the Ringwraith's sonic assault. He watched his dragons falter and grow angry. He snatched up the horn of victory and blew hard. The blast cut through the battlefield like a thunderclap. Dui's dragons surged, invigorated and ferocious. Saruman's cold-blooded dragons grew unsettled, their spells of disorientation broken. The shrieking fell mute against the horn's call. With renewed momentum, Dui's dragons chased down Saruman's mounts, burning and ripping them to pieces. Saruman ground his teeth at the noise from inside the dome. Beneath him, his ancient frost dragon Glorung drew in a lungful of icy power and unleashed it. The dome over Isengard blurred, frost crawling across its surface until it seemed to harden into ice. Saruman raised his staff, summoning jagged lightning to pummel the shell. Under cold and storm, the shield began to crack like thin glass. Dui's face tightened. The dome he had painstakingly woven was now in danger. He drew the golden bow given to him by the blue wizard Mornetar, notching a silver arrow. He loosed it. The arrow flew faster than sound, an instantaneous streak of silver light appearing before Saruman. Saruman, as if expecting it, held his staff in one hand and snatched the silver bolt out of the air with the other, a sneer curling his lips. "Mornetar's bow and arrow?" he mocked. "Did he not tell you I used them myself?" Dui's smile was calm and confident. "Explode." Runes along the arrowhead flared, then detonated in a concentrated blast, a supercharged, exploding charm. The force hurled Saruman bodily from the dragon's back and shattered Glorung's focus. The frost dragon's cold attack faltered and its flight wavered. The dome's ice fractured and then mended like a healed wound once the assault was broken. Saruman was caught mid-fall by another dragon, but his robes were singed and shredded, his skin marked with burns and scars. He was alive, but disgraced and furious. "Glorung!" he shouted through cracked breath. "Tear those dragons apart, then smash his shell!" Glorung obeyed, bathing the skies in a lethal frost. Against the ancient dragon's cold, Dui's fire-breathers looked puny, like mice beside an elephant. One dragon's breath was snuffed by the freezing blast and was encased in blue ice midair, its body brittle, then shattered into splinters as it struck the ground. The rest scattered in panic, unable to mount a coherent defense. Then a new roar rolled in from the west. Heads turned. On the horizon, a golden dragon came racing over a distant mountain. A great green snake coiled around its forelimbs, and a vast eagle rode in the creature's wake. Saruman's lips curled in contempt. "A single dragon?" he scoffed. "Glorung is an ancient dragon born in the First Age. A Third Age worm is but a stronger ant." "Glorung, kill the golden beast," he commanded. Glorung abandoned the hunt and rocketed towards Smaug, the golden dragon, who did not flinch. Smaug charged, throwing back his head to unleash a searing sheet of flame. At the same moment, Glorung exhaled blindingly cold frost. Fire met ice in a thunderous collision high above Isengard. Smaug's fire, as mighty as any known in the age, pushed hard. Glorung's frost was older, crueler, and the two forces ground against one another. As the contest tilted toward the frost dragon, a small but dangerous movement took place at Smaug's feet. The serpent coiled there, Heelbo the basilisk, slid upward. It wrapped itself around Smaug's neck and rested its head between Smaug's horns. Smaug did nothing, allowing the basilisk its perch. Then the serpent threw open its eyes, orange-yellow pits of living venom staring straight at Glorung. The ancient dragon froze, reeled as if struck, then crashed down in a thunderous fall that gouged a hill outside Isengard. "My dragon!" Saruman howled. Smaug surged after the fallen Glorung, spitting flames to finish the job. But something unexpected happened. The iron crown fixed to Glorung's brow pulsed with a dark aura. Black mist seemed to creep across his pupils, spiderwebbing his sight into shadow. The basilisk's glare, once deadly, could no longer touch those eyes. Glorung hauled himself from the rubble, now radiating a different, hungrier power, an evil leer in his gaze that chilled even Saruman. "A golden dragon and a snake that can steal sight. Curious," Glorung said, voice warped, examining the newcomers. He slowly, deliberately addressed Smaug. "Abandon your futile resistance. My Dark Lord seeks combatants, and I can give you what you desire." Smaug bristled and narrowed his eyes. The basilisk's coils tightened as if listening. "Sauron," Smaug hissed, seeing the shadow behind the crown and the command in the voice. "So it is you." The frost dragon, Glorung, tilted his head with a calculating smile. "Clever. Golden Smaug, I see the chains upon you. Serve me, and I will lift the oath that binds you. I will restore your freedom and shower you with the treasure of Mordor. You will be my lieutenant like Ancalagon of old." Smaug's snort was contempt laced with curiosity. "If you can free me, why should I not betray the one who holds me now? Why accept another master?" "It will not be the same," Glorung purred. Under me, you will not be a pet bound by magic. I will not enslave your will. I will make you my general, my right claw, regal and free to carve your legend as you see fit." Temptation flickered across Smaug's eyes, but he remained guarded. "Do you truly have the power to remove the oath, or is this deception?" Glaurung's smile grew cold and confident. "The oath is bound to the soul, but I have practiced in the dark arts of soulcraft. I will transfer the binding to a sliver of your essence, then sever that sliver from you. The chain will fall away. You will be unbound." Smaug studied the offer, the smoke curling from his nostrils, the basilisk's eyes glittering like coals. Around them, the sky still echoed with battle, the horn's call, the clash of ice and fire. But now the war had a new center, a bargain whispered in venom and shadow. Chapter 256, Crisis. When the frost dragon spoke, Smaug for a moment looked interested, then hesitated. "If I agree," he said, "my current master will know. The oath will punish me. I'll suffer its backlash." "That won't be a problem," the frost dragon replied. "Don't resist. I'll inject part of my power into you now to temporarily mask the oath. Once we return to Mordor, I'll remove it completely." He drew closer. The iron crown on his head thrummed with a dark, tangible aura, Sauron's power, poised to pour into Smaug the moment they touched. Smaug answered with flames. Before the frost dragon could reach him, he unleashed his full, scorching breath. The frost dragon's head was engulfed, scales hissed and melted like snow under a forge, and the iron crown glowed blood-hot. The frost dragon screamed as the fire ate into him. Flame after flame licked away his armor and left him burning. Only a desperate blast of cold saved him from being consumed, and even then, the damage was grave. "Damn you, Smaug," he howled, smothering his burning pain. "You dared to trick me. I will make you rue the day." Smaug flew for Isengard without looking back, chuckling as he spoke to the basilisk coiled around his neck. "The Dark Lord isn't very bright if he actually believed that," he said. "What a fool." The serpent basilisk Heilbo hissed and bobbed as if in agreement. Smaug only laughed. "I lie atop a mountain of gold, eat well, sleep well. Why would I betray my master to fight for a shadow without a body?" Outside Isengard, he opened fire. Scorching flame poured from his maw, while Heilbo widened his eyes and fixed everyone with that baleful glare. The two worked in deadly harmony. Dragons fell, burned or petrified by the basilisk's stare. Thorondor the giant eagle swooped through the chaos, tearing a dragon from the sky with talons and beak. Soon the air was thick with falling bodies. Riders lost mounts as dragons dropped dead beneath them. Smaug didn't dally. After a wild barrage, he dove through the protective dome, followed by his allies, and the other dragons took shelter inside as well, holding enemies at bay outside. Thorondor carried another dragon in his talons through the dome. It crumpled under the dome's shock and was finished with a merciless peck to the head. Smaug landed at the tower and grinned at Duir. "We're not late, are we?" he asked, puffing smoke. Heilbo flicked his tongue and hissed. Thorondor circled above, a living aegis. Duir smiled and shook his head. "No, you came just in time." He didn't bother to conceal that he'd heard everything. "Smaug, Sauron just offered to remove the oath. Why didn't you take it? Don't you want to be free?" Smaug looked at Duir worriedly. When he saw no anger in his master's face, relief flooded him, and he soon oozed flattery and greed. "Master, I would never betray you. I have my hoard. I sleep on my gold. I'd be a fool to go work myself to death for Sauron. And you can turn stone to gold. We'll have more treasure than I could ever want." Duir pushed aside the thought with a wry roll of his eyes. Legitimacy had left Smaug's greed plain as day. "I suppose that last line was the real deciding factor," he said, exasperated. Smaug only chuckled and repeated his pledge. The mood inside the dome eased, briefly. Then everything changed. The frost dragon returned, and this time he hit the dome with full force. A blizzard of extreme cold raced toward Isengard. Ice crept over the structure. Saruman added lightning from the sky, and the ringwraiths fed the assault with the Nine Rings' dark power. The dome groaned under the combined onslaught. Fissures spidered across its surface until, with a sound like breaking glass, it collapsed into fragments. "Duir, hand over the gem you made," the frost dragon demanded, greed sharpening his tone. His gaze fixed on Duir and the tiny object he knew the wizard had to possess. "I know you have apparition, but don't try to flee or call for help. Gondor and Rohan are under attack, and my armies are harassing Lothlorien and Rivendell. They won't be able to come to you." Dewey flinched at the names of Lothlorien and Rivendell, but steadied himself. Galadriel and Celeborn, Elrond and Glorfindel, those realms had defenders. Still, the Frost Dragon's bold plan to use the Philosopher's Stone to restore his body chilled him. He drew out the gem and flipped it in his palm, smirking. "You want to use the Philosopher's Stone to rebuild your body?" The Frost Dragon's eyes flared with avarice. "Then hand it over. For the stone, I might spare your life." Dewey's smile didn't reach his eyes. He cast a portkey on the stone. It vanished from his hand. The Frost Dragon snarled, stunned and furious. "Where did it go? Where did you put it?" Dewey didn't answer. He struck instead. "Avada Kedavra!" Cold air screamed up to intercept the killing curse. The Frost Dragon summoned an instant wall of ice that collided with the spell and shattered into powder. "Dewey, you've angered me," the Frost Dragon roared. "I meant to make you my most trusted servant, but that changes everything. I will kill you, cage your soul, and let it burn forever." He lashed out. Dewey apparated to avoid the freeze and reappeared on the back of a dragon. A flaming sword erupted into his hand. With a single brutal swing, he slit the dragon's slender neck as if cutting tofu. Wind razors and steam widened the wound until the dragon's scream was cut off and it fell. Dewey vanished before it hit, appearing on another mount, always just out of reach. The Frost Dragon retaliated. He blasted a stream of cold that instantly tried to freeze Dewey. The ring on Dewey's finger flared and raised a protective shield, stopping the cold from taking hold long enough for Dewey to apparate away. One dragon that Dewey had meant to kill was instead frozen solid by the Frost Dragon and shattered on impact. For all of Dewey's teleporting, the Frost Dragon's power was overwhelming. When Dewey finally appeared on his back, the giant flipped midair and tried to bite him. Dewey slipped free, by apparition a heartbeat before the jaws snapped shut and reappeared on the ground. Smaug was locked in his own duel with Saruman. Heilbo's gaze kept the White Wizard from opening his eyes, and the basilisk stare let Smaug score several blows. Around them, Thorondor, Aslan the Griffin, Cerberus, the three-headed hellhound, and other allies fought the Nazgul and their dragons. Thorondor, now immense, tore through dragons with chilling efficiency. Aslan darted and distracted. Cerberus spewed flame and venom at dismounted riders. Isengard became a maelstrom of wings, fire, and shadow. The Frost Dragon's cold was relentless. Isengard slipped into a sudden, unnatural winter. Orthanc iced over. The temperature plunged well below zero. And then, from the distance, the sound of horses and wings reached them, the Dunlendings, returning on hippogriffs, and Rohan's cavalry alongside them. King Thengel rode among them. They had arrived quicker than Dewey expected, and his surprise soured to worry. Were they ready for this? Would they be cannon fodder? The Dunlendings hurled themselves into the fray without hesitation. Brog, their leader, bellowed, "For Isengard, for Lord Dewey," and the Dunlending archers loosed a storm of arrows. Arrows clattered off dragon scales and hit nothing but air. The Nazgul smiled with disdain at such feeble resistance. The Frost Dragon treated the new arrivals like ants. He inhaled and sent a sweeping blast of Arctic air at the hippogriffs and cavalry to clear them away. Faces went pale as the cold bearing down on them. Dewey appeared between friend and blast in an instant. He raised his hand and threw up a vast, shimmering barrier that took the brunt of the Arctic wave. The barrier held, but the bite of the cold still cut through, and every warrior behind it felt the chill like knives. The battle had only intensified. Dewey's shield had saved the Rohirrim and Dunlendings for the moment, but the Frost Dragon's greed and power had not been sated. The Philosopher's Stone was gone, the dome was shattered, and Isengard was trapped in the teeth of a winter born of malice. Chapter 257, The Power of Humanity. The ring in Duir's hand flared, conjuring a solid dome of power that shielded him and the ranks of Dunlendings and Rohirrim behind him. He tightened the charm, holding back the Frost Dragon's numbing breath, and asked, bewildered, "Why did you come back?" Brog, leader of the Dunlendings, shifted uneasily beneath Duir's shield. Guilt clouded his face. "Lord Duir, we routed the Mordor host at the Ontwash Crossing. When we saw a dragon threatening Isengard, we returned to reinforce you. King Thengel brought half his cavalry as well. Have we been more of a burden than a help?" Brog had not calculated this outcome. He had only known that if Isengard were in danger, his duty was to come to its aid. Now his efforts seemed almost worthless. They could not harm even the weakest of the enemy dragons, let alone the frost dragon or Saruman. All the same, Duir did not see them as useless. Courage and numbers mattered. Enough ants could fell an elephant. 10,000 armed, determined men could make a difference. Duir tossed the golden bow to Brog and drew a quiver from his spatial pocket. "This bow never misses," he said. "The quiver holds mithril arrows, forged in the pattern of the three the blue wizard Morinetar once gave me. They pierce dragon scales, and I've etched explosive runes on them. Use them." Brog caught the bow and quiver like a man given a second life. Nearby, Duir handed a white horn to King Thengel. "The horn of victory," Duir told him. "Blow it when you can. It will steady our hearts and make the enemy waver." Thengel took the horn with a solemn nod. They could not win the skies by force of arms alone, but they could help from the ground, and the horn might be enough to turn hearts. Duir raised his hand, and the air answered. Fiendfire, a spectral blue conflagration, rose and swept through the ranks like a living thing. The warriors flinched, thinking themselves doomed, but the flames did them no harm. Duir's voice, amplified by magic, sounded in every ear. "This fire will protect us. It will also be the hellfire that burns our enemies. Hold your arrows into the fire, light them, and shoot." With uncertain hands, the Dunlendings and Rohirrim thrust their arrowheads into the fiendfire. The flames crept down each shaft and wrapped the arrows, turning them into streaks of burning blue without scalding their bearers. King Thengel lifted the horn of victory and blew a long, defiant blast. The sound snapped the soldiers back from fear into fierce resolve. Courage and hope surged through them. Bowstrings twanged in unison, and a hail of fiendfire arrows speared toward the sky. The frost dragon met the storm with a gale of cold so intense it could extinguish volcanoes. Ice and freezing breath struck the incoming arrows, and for a time held them at bay. Fiendfire, however, was no ordinary fire. It burned by rule of destruction, and in the clash it neither yielded easily nor was extinguished. The frost dragon's cold managed to blunt much of the assault by sheer volume, but other Mordor dragons fared far worse. Wherever a fiendfire arrow struck a dragon's scaling, the fire took like tinder and spread. Dragons that had soared confidently now ignited, roaring as fire raced along their flanks. Some plunged to the Eisen, desperate to douse the flames, but the water did little. The fiendfire devoured them until they were nothing but ash. The Ringwraith's mounts fared no better. Under the rain of burning arrows, they were set aflame and thrashed helplessly. Brog, testing Duir's golden bow, loosed a string of mithril arrows with a speed and precision that stunned even him. The arrows tore through the sky. Where they struck the Ringwraith's dragons, they exploded in runic fire, throwing both rider and beast backwards. Brog aimed for the eyes and mouths. A burst of blast and shrapnel blinded and decapitated more than one dragon at a single terrible strike. With the combined volley of fiendfire and Brog's mithril, Mordor's dragon force began to crumble. Saruman watched his carefully nurtured air armada burn away and felt fury and shock alike. He wanted to lay thunder and lightning upon the mortals, to smite them from the sky, but Smaug circled and watched him. The great dragon kept distance enough to prevent Saruman from moving freely and harried him with sudden blazes when he tried to act. King Thengel's horn, blown again and again, drove its own sickening rhythm into Saruman's head. Worse, Brog, the coarse mountain lord Saruman had tried to buy and failed, peppered him with accurate long-distance shots that interrupted his spellcasting. The frost dragon, seeing its winged allies falling and those insignificant humans causing such damage, became enraged beyond reason. "Duir," the frost dragon bellowed from the clouds, contempt dripping from his words. "You befriended these ants? Then watch me crush them." He climbed into the storm and summoned a cold so primeval it changed the sky. Great stones of ice, each the size of a cart or more, ripped loose from the cloud banks and began to fall like frozen meteorites. They hurtled downward in thunderous, air-splitting arcs. Men on the ground gaped. Terror etched itself on every face. "Protego Maxima," Duir cried, throwing up the largest protective charm he could muster. A vast dome, like a mighty umbrella of shimmering force, spread out and sheltered all beneath it. The hailstones slammed into the barrier with the force of boulders. Each impact sent ripples across the dome. Duir felt the shock travel down his arms and into his bones as if tens of thousands of warhammers struck him at once. He gritted his teeth and held the enchantment steady. Outside the dome, the land was torn asunder. Massive craters studded the fields and smashed stone walls. Whole groves lay felled. Smaug and the great eagle Thorondor were tossed and battered in the sky, their wings struck and broken by falling ice. Dragons that could not evade were split apart or left half-crumpled on the ground. Even Saruman had to abandon elaborate attacks to dodge or reinforce himself against the hail. Isengard itself looked like a battlefield after some cataclysm, save for one thing. Orthanc, black and unbowed, stood intact in the center of the ruin. Seeing the tower untouched, Duir barked, "Get inside Orthanc! Take shelter now!" The Dunlendings and Rohirrim surged toward the tower. For a moment they felt safety beneath its shadow. Then one of the Rohirrim stopped dead, eyes wide. "The sky," he whispered. They all looked up. The frost dragon had clutched between his talons a vast slab of ice, a berg the size of half a hill, glittering with a cruel blue light. Jagged icicles hung from its edges like teeth. Even for a creature of the dragon's size, holding such a mass was an act of madness. The beast smiled with pure malice and let go. The iceberg plunged, tearing the air as it fell, gaining terrible momentum. If it struck Orthanc, it would put an end to everyone inside. Saruman cursed and, seeing no other option, mounted his last remaining dragon and fled Isengard like a man who knows death stalks his heels. Duir's shield was already stretched to its limits. He could not hold such a blow for more than a handful of seconds. He had no confidence a protective wall would survive the iceberg's impact. His only hope was movement, escape, or better, to meet the threat head-on. The soldiers around him looked up at Duir with a mixture of fear and pleading hope. In that instant, Duir's mind spun, searching for any way to turn the tide. He did not hesitate. He apparated and in a blink stood upon Smaug's massive back high in the sky. Wrapped in the dragon's heat and wind, he planted both hands on his staff, mouth forming the hardest, loudest spell he could muster. Bombarda Maxima! A column of blinding power shot skyward and met the falling iceberg with a deafening, invisible collision. For a breath, there was an almost suffocating silence. Then the ice sheared apart. The berg shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments and vaporized where the spell struck, sending a radial shockwave outward like an invisible giant palm. Clouds were ripped aside by the force. The immediate danger had been torn from the sky. Chapter 258, Silently. The explosion lit the sky, and for a suspended heartbeat, everyone below dared to hope. Then the ice mountain reformed out of the blast cloud as if nothing had happened. Dewey's full-strength blow had shattered only the lower half. The massive crown of frozen rock remained intact. It had been formed and tempered by a frost dragon's breath, so cold and dense it was almost indestructible. The shattered mass paused for a breath, then resumed its plunge straight toward Isengard. On the ground, the black barbarians and the riders of Rohan watched helplessly. Dewey, still atop Smaug's back, refused to yield. He threw up spells in a frantic chain, cushioning charm, Protego Totalum, Super Protego Fortification, while, with the other hand, he activated the Ring of Power. An unprecedented shield bloomed from the ring, a dome of shimmering magic that swallowed the black barbarians, the Rohirrim, the giant eagle Thorondor, the griffin Aslan, and the three-headed wolf Cerberus. All the ring's stored power poured into keeping that barrier whole. Dewey stood on Smaug's back, at the very apex of the dome, palm pressed to the sky as if he physically held the world. The ice mountain rocked as if slowed by his resistance. But the frost dragon above had no intention of conceding. It dove again and again, blasting torrents of lethal cold into the slab of ice, making it denser, heavier, accelerating its fall. One by one, Dewey's wards shattered like glass. The ice mountain, a hurtling monolith, slammed into the ring's shield with an impact that made the air itself scream. Ice shattered and flew in every direction. A freezing blizzard swept the countryside. A shockwave rolled outward, flattening trees and scouring boulders. Even through the faltering shield, Dewey felt the force wrench him. Smaug screamed as if crushed by the weight of worlds. The dragon's wings splayed. He could not hold altitude. He nosedived, and the dome that had sheltered so many split like a collapsing bell. The mountain struck Orthanc with a thunder that seemed to count down doom itself. Stone and ice exploded, the pinnacle of the tower sheared away. Eagles, griffins, and other flying beasts were ripped from the sky, screaming as they fell. Brog, leader of the Black Barbarians, stared at the tumbling ice and wondered, raw and simple, if this was the end. King Thengel of Rohan, after a flash of terror, grew oddly calm. He looked at his men with an apology in his eyes, and then toward Rohan, his face a portrait of unwilling farewell. They closed their eyes. They waited for the final collapse. Instead, something answered from Smaug's back. A terrible power erupted, quiet and absolute. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ice and rubble hung in the air, spinning lazily like ornaments caught in a frozen moment. The falling beasts were suspended mid-plummet. The massive ice mountain had halted inches above the ruined tower, frozen in time as if bound by a god's hand. All eyes were drawn to a black mass above Smaug, a churning dust-like mist that pulsed with a malign intelligence. It condensed and surged like living shadow, then wheeled toward the ice mountain. Where that blackness touched, the mountain shredded. The mist spread like gauze, tearing the frozen monolith into a million glittering shards, the sky filled with bloodless snow. The frost dragon narrowed its eyes. "Are you Duir?" it breathed, incredulous. The mass did not answer. It became wind and struck the dragon itself. The frost dragon lashed out with blasts of absolute cold, but the black wind slipped around the blasts, flowing like smoke. It wrapped the dragon, eating into scale and sinew. The dragon's ice-hard plates cracked, its thick hide split, and black, freezing blood ran. The creature writhed and could not pull the mist from its claws. The darkness ran through its talons like quicksilver, impervious to any tearing. In a desperate gamble, the dragon blasted itself with a sheet of cold, freezing part of the black mass into blocks of deep, glassy ice. It was a temporary reprieve. Frozen fragments fell away like crusts, and still the darkness did not stop. The black mist sought the base of a wing, and with the speed of a viper, tore one massive limb free at the root. The frost dragon shrieked. With one wing gone, it plunged from the sky and smashed into the hill between Isengard and the edge of Fangorn Forest. The world buckled. A crater opened. The dragon crawled out and roared, raw and furious. The ringwraiths converged, blades gleaming. The black mist parted into 8 writhing tendrils and tangled with them. Morgul's steel could not harm it. Then lightning stabbed the air, Saruman's strike, smashing into the blackness. The mass recoiled and gave a sound like a soul in pain. In that instant of rupture, a face surfaced within the black. Dewey's face, pale and contorted, appearing and fading like a likeness in smoke. Saruman, atop his own dragon, laughed. "Humph, boy, no matter your tricks, you die today." The frost dragon and Saruman struck in tandem, lightning and cold. The black mass shrank, and Dewey's features twisted in a more pained, tortured way. For a heartbeat, it seemed the darkness might be forced back. Then a clear blast of horn cut the sky like sunlight. 2 mithril arrows streaked, one toward Saruman, one toward the frost dragon. Brog and King Thengel, seeing Dewey's danger, had moved at the same instant. Thengel's horn of victory was lifted, and Brog loosed a shaft of mithril. The horn's note hammered the ears of the frost dragon and Saruman, reverberated through the black mist, and bought the darkness time. Though the arrows missed, the distraction was enough. An answering rain of ordinary arrows descended. The black mass took the moment. It lunged at Saruman's dragon, tore that mount apart, and the wizard went down with it. The darkness ignored Saruman's cries and raced for the frost dragon, slipping away from another blast of chill. It crept onto the dragon's head and began to gnaw at an iron crown that had grown into the beast's skull as if fused to it. The crown came away only with blood and bone. The dragon thrashed in agony. The ringwraiths swarmed, but Morgul blades could not hold the black smoke that clung like tar. With a last resisted roar, the iron crown was wrenched free and clattered to the ground. As it left, the liquid, demonic shadow in the frost dragon's eyes drained away. Clarity returned. The battlefield, which had been a cacophony of battle, became strangely still. For a breath, the ringwraiths hesitated. Then the dragon's gaze flared with ancient, lethal hate. It bellowed, voice like breaking glaciers. "Sauron," it spat, each syllable a thunderbolt. "You despicable, shameless scoundrel. Only a servant of my old master, and yet you dared." "Revenge! I will have my revenge," it cried. I will turn Mordor into a glacier. I will destroy everything you possess." Without warning, the frost dragon unleashed a barrage of cold, the likes of which none had felt. The ringwraiths were caught before they could flee. Their riders and steeds froze on the spot. Only the Witch King of Angmar moved fast enough to escape. The others, encased in rime, shattered beneath the dragon's crushing feet. The dragon spat toward the iron crown on the ground and ground it under claw and talon until the metal crumpled into useless fragments. Then its eyes locked on Saruman. Old enemies confronted one another. The dragon's fury burned hotter for the betrayal that had been done to it. "Despicable wizard," it roared. "Had you not disturbed my sleep and poisoned me with Ungoliant's venom, I would never have been made a tool of Sauron. You used my blood to fashion those filthy, lowly mongrels. Now you will pay." Chapter 259, Revenge of the Frost Dragon. The Frost Dragon's hatred for Saruman was equal only to his hatred for Sauron. He lunged at the fallen wizard with blind fury, mouth and nostrils blasting a freezing wind meant to pin Saruman in ice and then torment him. Saruman, having lost his dragon mount, could only scramble on the ground. He planted his staff, threw up a faint protective shield, and cried, "Glaurung, we can talk." The light shield slowed the bite of cold, but the wind still found its way in, frosting Saruman's eyebrows and beard. He tried to placate the beast, but the dragon wanted no parley, only vengeance. It snapped at Saruman with massive jaws. Saruman scowled and answered with fire. A colossal fireball slammed into the dragon's open maw. Ice and flame met inside the beast and erupted into steam, choking and blinding it. The frost dragon coughed and rattled from the scalding fog, only to lash out again with even greater fury. Saruman refused to be cowed. He hurled shockwaves and called lightning, pounding against the mountain-sized dragon. The two of them tore the landscape apart, trees, boulders, and ridgelines shred by the aftershocks as if they were paper. The Isen, once a surging river, froze under the dragon's breath. Early summer became an Arctic midwinter, snow stinging in constant blizzard. The wild men, the Rohirrim, even the dragon smog, none intervened. They watched. A black, fog-like mass coalesced nearby and reformed into a man. Brog, leader of the wild men, and King Thengel stared. "Lord Duir, are you all right?" Brog asked, concern in his voice. Dewey chuckled and shook his head. "I'm fine. I've gained something unexpected." With a gesture, his fingers dissolved into black mist and then reasserted into flesh. The men around him stood open-mouthed as the fog curled back to bone and skin. Dewey's lips curved in a knowing smile. In the heat of battle, he had triggered something he had not expected to possess. An Obscurus. He had learned of it at Hildorian, the birthplace of men, where he had registered and acquired the obscurial talent. In wizarding lore, an Obscurus is a dark magical force born when a young witch or wizard represses their power, a formless black mist that feeds on the suppressed magic. An Obscurial is the person who harbors it. The histories are grim. Obscurials are usually children forced to hide their magic, their pain turning the power volatile and destructive. The Obscurus ravages the surroundings and consumes the host's life force. Most die before adolescence. The name alone drew fear and predatory interest, as in the case of Credence, who survived into adulthood and attracted Grindelwald's covetous attention. Dewey had a different interpretation. To him, the Obscurus felt less like a curse and more like an elemental stage, part body, part magic. When he shifted, his flesh felt to thin into pure energy. Physical attacks slid through him, ordinary spells glanced off. Even grievous magical wounds that would kill a normal man left him only singed, because there was no longer a traditional body to destroy. Yet the Obscurus was not automatically lawless. Its volatility, he suspected, depended on the mind that contained it. Most Obscurials had been abused, lonely, full of anger, so their Obscuri were chaotic and murderous. Dewey had not lived that way. His emotions were steady, and his body was not ordinary. Nourished by Entdrots, refined by the Philosopher's Stone, protected by a divine golden cup, his physiology had elven resilience. The Obscurus inside him did not tear him apart immediately. That said, it still eroded him with use. He could not remain in that form indefinitely without risking collapse. For now, though, the sudden transformation had bought him power, and, apparently, a new edge. From his vantage point, he watched Saruman and the Frost Dragon batter each other. The beast was as legendary as the tales said. Enormous, ancient, a survivor of the old wars. Even when Dewey had earlier manifested his Obscurus and struck one blow, he had only broken a wing. The dragon's body, lengths of frozen muscle, pressed relentlessly on Saruman now, and its cold did more than chill. It could freeze magic itself, even things like fiendfire. Saruman's fire and lightning struggled to penetrate that frosty aura. Saruman, however, was not simply overmatched. He was wary, half his energy devoted to keeping an eye on Dewey, guarding against treachery. He had already lost the winged dragons he had bred. The dragon that had been under Sauron's sway had broken free, and the Nazgul had been returned to their master. He knew his mission had failed and was thinking of withdrawal, but the dragon's teeth and a covetous Duir kept him pinned. As Saruman tightened his shield against another gust of freezing air, Dewey vanished and reappeared behind him, wand at the ready. Avada Kedavra, he spat. Saruman, expecting treachery, was prepared. With a flick, he condensed the frost into a barrier behind him. He stared at Dewey, then murmured an incantation and summoned a raging wind. The whirlwind grew into a tornado that tore stones and trees into its maw. Dewey flinched, thinking the tornado was aimed at him, yet Saruman strode into the vortex himself and was swept upwards. In an instant, the tornado carried him eastward, away from the battlefield. Dewey could not stop him. Left standing, the frost dragon tried to give chase, testing his wings, but one was damaged. The beast turned its burning, frosted gaze toward Dewey, nostrils flaring black steam. "You helped me break free from the worm's control," it rumbled, voice like glacier rock. "You crippled my wing. You must die." It opened its maw and unleashed a hurricane of cold in Dewey's direction.